Chapter 988. As a result, no one dared to act rashly. Of course, the bag of silver was tempting, but this young ranger with a sword and a horse didn't look like someone who would be easily killed. Seeing that they weren't moving, the ranger squeezed his horse's belly, and the horse's hooves gently stepped on the ground, heading towards the bag of silver. At that moment, a wooden spear flew out at high speed, and the sharpened spear was aimed at the ranger's chest. The person who threw the spear was a tall and sturdy young man. The young man's spearmanship was trained by killing countless cunning gerbils. Naturally, he stabbed wherever he pointed, and his accuracy was impeccable. Unfortunately, the ranger didn't know how to move the wooden spear. He turned the tip of the spear around and grasped it lightly. Other than the vicious young man who didn't know what to do, the rest of the men and women retreated with their spears, drawing a clear line between them and the young man. The ranger with a sword pierced the money bag with the tip of his spear, and urged his horse slowly towards the young man. The money bag was tightly knitted, and it slid to the middle of the wooden spear before stopping. The horse's hooves weren't heavy, but they hit the hearts of the refugees. The young man who was tempted by the money didn't wait for death. Instead of retreating, he charged forward, facing the man and the horse. He didn't run in a straight line, but like a snake slithering in the sand, the agile young man swept past the horse's head, and with a twist of his toes, he fiercely slammed into the side of the horse's belly. The ranger casually reached out, grabbed the young man's head, and threw it up high, the tip of his spear aimed at the young man's belly. At that moment, a wail came from behind the men and women, and a skinny little girl staggered out of the human wall. The ranger frowned, and the spear drew half an arc in the air. The young man fell heavily to the ground, escaping the fate of being pierced by his own spear. He shook his head, and after trying his best to stand up, he shielded the skinny little girl behind him and stared at the ranger with a wooden spear on the horse's back. The ranger threw the wooden spear, and it was nailed into the yellow sand a few steps in front of the young man and the little girl. His gaze leaped over the young man's head, and he glanced at the group of refugees. Only then did he pull on the reins and turn around to leave. The little girl, who was so skinny that she couldn't even get frostbite, sobbed as she hugged the young man who was dependent on her for survival. The young man who survived the disaster pulled out the spear with trembling hands and pulled the heavy money bag onto his hand. He untied the knot and poured out a small piece of broken silver. Then, he handed the money bag to the elders in the village to divide the spoils. It was not that the young man was poor and generous. It was just that even if he took a little more than that, he would be beaten up badly. But this time, the young man was greatly surprised. None of the 30 or so men and women in the village came forward to take the money bag. The young man wasn't stupid. He remembered the glance the ranger gave him before he left. It was obvious that the Jianghu expert had made these people not dare to touch the silver. The young man didn't have any elders in his family. Even if he hadn't studied for a day or learned a word, he had still been taught the ways of the world. He used the money to buy a pitiful amount of dried meat and coarse grain from those people. After squandering the money bag, the young man didn't rush back to the village. Instead, he gave the small piece of broken silver to his little sister, squatted down, and let her ride on his neck. He slowly stood up, holding the wooden spear that had almost taken his life. The young man was somewhat annoyed that the money bag had also been taken by someone else. He looked in the direction of Xianxia city, but he couldn't see the ranger anymore. The young man smiled brightly and said, "Little grassroot, it's silver." The little girl, who was holding the broken silver tightly, rested her chin on her older brother's head and made a sound of agreement. The rider rushed into the dilapidated Xianxia city before the gates were closed. There was no such thing as a pass here. Being able to stay alive was the biggest pass. Who cared about your surname or your household registration? In this city, it didn't matter if you were Zhang Julu or Grand Secretary Zhang. It was the same even if you were the emperor's son. Perhaps only that person surnamed Su from Bailiang had the authority to make a decision. After the ranger entered the city, he sat high on his horse and looked around. It was indeed different from the cities within Bailiang's jurisdiction. It had nothing to do with whether it was rich or poor. Tuma Pass was also poor, but the people on the streets lived a stable and free life. On the streets of Xianxia city, there was actually no lack of well-off men dressed in silk and satin. However, everyone was afraid of danger and looked at each other with deep vigilance. Moreover, there were very few travelers who were alone. Most of them were in groups. Some of the local ruffians squatting on the streets with nothing to do were not as lazy as the local tyrants of the Central Plains, who gave people the feeling that they were half dead. At this moment, the people who raised their heads to look at him were all emitting ominous glints. It was as if they had calculated how much money he, a horse, 2 knives, and all of his belongings could be sold for. They were also weighing whether or not they should risk their lives for this windfall. In this dangerous place where everyone was jackals and wolves, if a scholar who could recite the wind and recite the moon was thrown into the city, he would probably end up being hacked to death on the spot. The ranger raised his head slightly and saw the tallest wolf smoke arrow tower in the city. Out of the hundreds of thousands of refugees, only 4 people had managed to carve out a bloody path and proclaimed themselves as kings in the past 20 years. 3 of them had occupied Fengxiang, Linyao, and Qingcang respectively, and the last vassal king had established a huge sect between Linyao and Fengxiang that could support tens of thousands of people. The one who held Qingcang was the weakest because he was constantly being cut by Bailiang's cavalry with blunt knives. However, he was also the most violent. His real name was Kai Junchen, and he used to be a mediocre swordsman on Liang Lake. Later on, he was lucky enough to make a name for himself here, and he gave himself a nondescript nickname, something like the 1000 Frost and 1000 Snow Pear Flower Sword. Whenever a famous swordsman came by, he would be invited by the master of Qingcang to exchange swordsmanship with him. After that, the swordsman's swords became Kai Junchen's treasured playthings. When he was troubled, he liked to plant famous swords all over women's bodies, and he called it a tree of pear flowers. It was clear that this city lord, who was respectfully called the Dragon King of Western Xia by the local refugees, was very elegant. The paladin followed the wolf smoke arrow tower in his line of sight and headed west. Kai Junchen's residence of the Dragon King was in the westernmost part of the city. There was no other way. Qingcang was the closest to Bailiang in the east. Kai Junchen would be able to escape faster if he abandoned the city. The Dragon King of Western Xia kept saying that he would lead his troops to Mount Qingliang one day. Who would believe him? Kai Junchen would probably be the first to not believe him. The residence of the Dragon King in Qingcang City encompassed the entire western part of the city. Based on the structure of the capital, it was divided into the inner palace and the outer palace. The so-called walls of the palace were merely red battlements that were 20 feet tall. However, some of the palaces and pavilions in the city were covered in bright yellow glazed tiles. It was not easy for them to have a little bit of the spirit of an imperial family, but they were all ruined by the arrow towers of different heights. Every time there was a rebellion in Qingcang, the palace walls would be easily flipped over. Then, it would be these porcupine-like arrow towers that would do the work. However, this kind of rebellion would at most number 200 to 300 people. It was not even comparable to the chaotic battles of horse bandits in the land of refugees. When this rider was still 100 feet away from the gate of the palace, he was intercepted by a group of leather-armored foot soldiers who were holding a rarely seen shiny iron spear. The leader was a burly man who looked like a military officer. He wore an old southern Tang-style armor. When he caught a glimpse of the 2 sabers that the bold fellow was carrying, he could not shift his burning gaze away. He laughed loudly and said, "There is a thief who has trespassed into the palace. Men, kill him on the spot." More than 20 spear-wielding foot soldiers rushed over. There was no formation to speak of, but they had the advantage of being vigorous and incomparably dauntless. Suddenly, the military officer shouted sternly, "Wait!" The foot soldiers stopped abruptly. The burly man in Tang armor pulled out his saber and pointed at the paladin. He laughed and said, "Boy, your saber is a good one. Before you die, tell me the name of your saber." Snatching a famous saber is not the same as snatching a woman. The latter does not need to care about the name. I do not know how to take pity on women, but I am a man who cherishes a good saber. The paladin was dressed in a hemp robe as white as snow. He smiled and said, "One is embroidered winter, the other is crossing the river soldier." Chapter 989. The lieutenant in old Tang armor chewed on the meaning of the 2 names but did not find anything special. Instead, he felt that they were not very particular and could not be used to scare people. Somewhat disappointed, the lieutenant raised the tip of his sword and pointed at the rough man. More than 20 spear-wielding infantrymen rushed forward. The young man on the horse had a calm expression. His right index finger lightly tapped the back of his right hand that was holding the reins. Just as the infantrymen were about to stab the man and the horse into hedgehogs, a rider rushed out of the palace. A thunderous roar tried to stop the infantryman's charge. However, there were still 2 strong infantrymen who could not stop in time and quickly thrust out their iron spears. Then with a bang, The two guards flew back along with their spears. It was as if their chests were pierced by a powerful arrow. They exploded into a large pool of blood and fell to the ground dead. The Tangjia lieutenant had good eyesight and knew his stuff. If he wasn't a martial pathmaster, he would have dug out his eyeballs to see how the linen-clothed ranger killed without leaving a trace. He turned his horse around and respectfully bowed to the general who rushed out of the palace gates. He cupped his fists and said, "I greet the East-conquering general." The middle-aged general who was respectfully called the East-conquering general glanced at the face of the infantryman. He noticed that there was a hint of mockery at the corner of the man's mouth. This rough man actually blushed. This general of his was naturally wild. The lord of Qingcang, Kai Junchen, gave him an official position and rewarded him with some second-grade or third-grade official titles. In any case, he did not need a single copper coin from Kai Junchen. Other than He Dajie, the great general of the East, there were also Anqi Garrison, North Patrol, and South Patrol. In any case, they had gathered the East, West, North, and South. East of Qingcang was Northern Liang. Thus, great general of the East, He Dajie, had often been teased by his political opponents. They all said that they were waiting for him to go to Northern Liang and achieve a great victory. In name, He Dajie was a general, but in reality, he only had 1,500 soldiers and horses under him. The armored soldiers did not make up half of them. He Dajie did not pay attention to the lieutenant who touched the pot that did not boil. His expression was serious as he cupped his fists and said calmly, "My king would like to invite you into the palace for a chat. What do you think?" The infantryman nodded. He still did not realize that he had stepped into a tiger's den. He held the reins with both hands and looked at the city gates. The light horse's hooves stepped on the green jade tiles, making a crisp sound. He Dajie followed behind the infantryman with a complicated expression. His heart was in turmoil. When the infantryman approached the city, a secret letter was sent to the residence of the Dragon King. The Qingcang king, who did not attend court every night, was frightened. He hurriedly kicked away a few naked bodies beside him and rolled off the bed. He put on a poorly made dragon robe and was about to convene a court meeting. In addition to He Dajie, there was also Zhang Heng, the South Patrol general. Together with the queen and a few civil and military officials, they were arguing over a portrait. Zhang Heng insisted on killing His Royal Highness of Bailiang before discussing anything else. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Anyway, the new king of Bailiang had the intention to bury hundreds of thousands of refugees with the old king. Either way, he would die. Even if he killed the man in the portrait, even if he angered the Bailiang cavalry, he could just take the head and thousands of elites and escape to Beimang. Kai Junchen specially asked the confidant of the Qingcang king, who was in charge of spies, whether Bailiang had deployed a large number of troops to the border. The answer he received was no. The man in the portrait had left Liangzhou alone and entered Qingcang city alone. This made the timid and cautious Kai Junchen even more uncertain. Was this guy tired of living? Did he really think that he could win people over with virtue in the refugee land just because he was the king of Bailiang? Did he want Kai Junchen to take off the dragon robe that he had only worn for a few years and kowtow to him? Was he willing to be a lackey for a hothead who did not have hair on his mouth? Kai Junchen could not stand the instigation and clamor of most of the civil and military officials. He gritted his teeth. He had originally made up his mind to send out all the masters in the residence of Dragon King and 2,000 cavalrymen to kill that guy at the gate of the imperial city today. However, the queen and He Dajie did not agree. They said that the guy surnamed Su gave up his position as the king of Bailiang and came to Qingcang city to seek his own death. Even if he did not have good intentions, he would not be able to stir up any trouble in the residence of Dragon King, which was heavily guarded by swords and spears and arrow towers. It was better to meet him and listen to his plans before making the corresponding trade-offs. There were only benefits and no harm. In the end, He Dajie was scolded by an old official for being soft-hearted. Fortunately, he had the support of the queen, so he was able to ride out of the palace and welcome the new prince of Liang, who was wearing mourning clothes. After passing through the city gate, there was another palace gate. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed and said, "He Dajie, I heard that you and Yang Ruanyu, who was guarding the gate just now, and his father Yang Yoshue, were both subordinates of the deputy commander of Bailiang's infantry army, great ancestor Gu." He Dajie acted as if he was facing a great enemy. He carefully worded his words and said coldly, "The past is not worth mentioning. Old General Gu has become a high official of Bailiang. It is a good thing, but it is not my turn to congratulate him. Su Fengnian laughed softly and said, "The deputy commander of Bailiang's infantry army is only of the second rank. Only Yan Wenluan and Yuan Zuozong have the same rank as you, Great General Zhendong. Speaking of congratulating, it should be Great Ancestor Gu who should congratulate you." He Dajie, who was ridiculed to the extreme, snorted coldly. The palace gate opened and a dozen people walked out. The official embellishments were either red-crowned cranes, golden pheasants, or unicorns and lions. The one in the middle was not Kai Junchen, but a noblewoman wearing a phoenix coronet and a red robe. It was hard to say what kind of motherly style she had, but the thumb-sized pearls hanging all over her body were very valuable. If this group of aggressive fellows were in Liyang, their entire family would have been exterminated just based on their overbearing attire. There were 2 arrow towers built inside the palace wall. Soon, someone drew their bow and shot an arrow, giving Su Fengnian a show of strength. It was the long-lost Shishu chain arrow, the mother and son linked heart arrow. The 2 arrows were of different lengths and were shot at Su Fengnian's face. The mother and son linked heart arrow was only an entry-level archery skill in the Shishu chain arrow. Su Fengnian flicked his sleeve and caught the 2 arrows. He held them horizontally in front of his chest and broke them inch by inch and threw them on the ground. He saw the Southern Patrol General Zhang Heng, who was known as the #1 master of Qing Tsong, pull out his saber, walk down the stairs and swagger towards him. Su Fengnian turned to He Dajie and laughed. "Is this how you treat your guests in Qing Tsong?" He Dajie said with a straight face, "Whether it is a toast or a punishment depends on your ability." Chapter 990. Su Fengnian smiled and dismounted from his horse. Zhang Heng was like a wild horse that had escaped from its reins. He charged straight at Su Fengnian with his saber. His momentum was overwhelming. However, when he was 10 feet away from the young lord of Northern Liang, everyone saw an incredible scene. General Zhang's saber art was like a rainbow. It was beautiful and murderous. It was obvious that he had gained the upper hand by showing his strength. However, before he could even touch the rough guest's body with his saber, streams of scarlet blood began to emerge from his body like fountains. This was the miserable scene of a warhorse crashing into the Mo saber formation. The bystanders felt baffled, but the Southern Patrolling Grand General himself felt as if he had fallen into the clouds and mist, complaining incessantly. He hastily stopped the saber momentum that was tantamount to suicide, and was about to decisively retreat to evade the edge of the saber. His body was pierced with 6 holes by the invisible sharp weapons. He did not know who to complain to. Could it be that the young man in front of him, who had both hands in his sleeves and was clearly 2 feet away from the twin sabers at his waist, was a master of secret weapons who was proficient in the sleeve universe? Zhang Heng originally wanted to gain some face for the Dragon King residence, so that the Azure Kingdom could bargain with the Bailiang. Now, he gave up on this thought and thought that stopping the bleeding was the most important thing. However, everything in front of him turned black and the South Patrolling General had no more words to say. Su Fengnian held Zhang Heng's head that was dripping blood on the ground with one hand and the headless body with the other. He threw it up and smashed it onto the watchtower where the archer was at. Instantly, the fence shattered. The East-conquering General He Dajie behind Su Fengnian swallowed his saliva. He couldn't help but feel sad for Zhang Heng. He had never gotten along with Zhang Heng, but Zhang Heng died in just one exchange. Who knew if the next one would be He Dajie, who he hadn't even reached Master Realm yet? Su Fengnian threw the head and it rolled all the way to the bottom of the stairs. He smiled and said, "You don't want to do it the easy way, but you want to do it the hard way." He Dajie's face was really ugly and he got off the horse silently. Su Fengnian raised his voice and slowly walked forward. "Tell Kai Junchen to get his ass out here. This king has already given the Qing Tsong Empire enough face by entering the city. If you don't accept the face I've given you, you'll end up like Zhang Heng." The fox-like woman who was dressed as the empress of a country raised her arm. Behind her, no less than 200 armored guards rushed out and stood in formation at the bottom of the stairs. Almost at the same time, numerous archers appeared on the palace walls. There were also more than 10 old men who looked like they were guarding beside the woman. The elites of the residence of Dragon King had all come out. Su Fengnian looked around. The gate of the royal palace had been closed. Outside the gate, hundreds of soldiers with spears swarmed into the city. It seemed that they had made up their minds to close the gate and beat the dog. The woman pushed away a squire who was carefully guarding in front of her, and glanced at the head at the bottom of the stairs. She raised her head and smiled coquettishly. "King of Bailiang, Qingcang's hospitality is not small, is it? If you can still take it, I respect heroes the most. What's wrong with helping you bathe and change your clothes? Su Fengnian gestured with his finger, indicating for the residents of Dragon King to make their move. The first batch of 30 armored soldiers surrounded and attacked. Su Fengnian crossed his arms in front of his chest and remained indifferent. With a crash, the first batch of 30 heads that formed a circle were thrown high into the air. The second batch of armored soldiers did not have time to stop and their heads flew into the air again. These two batches of people were cut off from their shoulders as if they were being twirled and swung by a child to cut rice. The beautiful woman who looked like the most beautiful courtesan in a brothel was truly ruthless. There was no fear on her pretty face as she ordered, "Continue to attack. All captains, draw your swords and supervise the formation. Those who retreat without permission will be killed without mercy. After this, their families will be exterminated. The person who obtains the greatest merit today will be given half of the property of the Southern Patrol General, Zhang Heng." Su Fengnian closed his eyes and concentrated. After the 3 batches of armored soldiers were all decapitated, they learned to be smarter. The encirclement became thinner and thinner, but they still could not escape the fate of losing their heads. Fortunately, the number of casualties was quickly replenished by the armored soldiers within the palace. The square between the palace and the imperial city was still increasing in number. An old swordsman with a goatee approached the woman and reported softly, "Queen, it should be an extremely rare flying sword technique in the Jianghu. If I am not wrong, it is somewhat similar to the Wu family's sword tomb." The woman frowned. "I don't care if it is a flying sword or not. I just want to know when this kind of suicidal behavior will end." The goateed swordsman glanced out of the corner of his eye at the woman's chest. His Adam's apple moved slightly, but his words were still respectful and reverent. Compared to his superior flying sword technique, this child's internal energy cultivation isn't that shocking. This old man guesses that after 200 or 300 people die in battle, this fellow will be an arrow at the end of its flight. At that time, Her Majesty the Queen will have external experts charge in recklessly, and they should be able to accomplish something. The Queen sneered, "Just external experts may not be enough. I feel that I need the help of a sword expert like you to hold the line." The short and thin old swordsman smiled embarrassedly. "The Queen is right. In order to solve the Queen's problems, Mao Bishan will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire." A tall and sturdy man with a long sword on his back crossed the threshold of the palace and walked to the side of the woman. He stood on the left and right of Mao Bishan, who was also valued by the residents of Dragon King, and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, after the flying sword technique of the Wu family's sword tomb enters the mysterious realm, there is no need for too much internal energy to support it. With a thought, the flying sword will arrive. It is not wise to die like this." Mao Bishan clicked his tongue. "Oh, Gu Feiqing, when did you become so familiar with the Wu family's flying sword technique that is not taught to outsiders? Could it be that you have been hiding all these years and your surname is not Gu but Wu? You have the same background as the Peach Blossom Sword God and are the illegitimate son of a sword immortal in the sword tomb?" Gu Feiqing did not even look at this old man who had been expelled from a famous Taoist sect. He said calmly, "I am only passing on the original words of Great Master Tang of the palace." Upon hearing the title of Great Master Tang, Mao Bishan immediately kept quiet out of fear. Those who were in power at the moment in Qingcang knew that Kai Junshan's success was due to the queen, Yu Ruru, who was good at recommending herself. Kai Junshan started from a homeless person in the past 20 years and worked under 4 powerful people. Relying on Yu Ruru's wife's relations, he was highly valued every time. Then, every time he was fully developed, he would decisively betray them. In the land of homeless people, there was a saying, "Thousands of snow and pear swords," for surnamed slaves who betrayed their wives. However, if it was only Yu Ruru who had a soft waist, Kai Junshan would not have been able to achieve what he had today. Many years ago, he met a noble whose surname was Tang. He learned many different things and his martial arts realm was unfathomable. The original Qingcang city lord, Ruan Shandong, if it wasn't for the Tang guy who captured him at the last moment, Kai Junshan would have been killed. This great bodhisattva was respected by the couple as the old master, and he had not fought in recent years. Apart from that, the Dragon King residents had 2 other masters whose cultivation was unfathomable. For example, Mao Bishan was close to grade 2 master. Every time he saw the 3 of them who were of different ages, he would feel fear. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and reached out. He used his qi to grab an iron spear. He had lost his patience and wanted to break into the palace. In the land of homeless people, only knowing how to kill people could not accomplish anything. However, if one did not know how to kill people, then one could not do anything. Chapter 991. When Su Fengnian walked towards the palace gates with his spear, the soldiers below the steps breathed faster. Fortunately, the mistress of the residence of Dragon King, Queen Yu Ruru, did not let them die. She smiled gently and said, "Since the king of Bailiang wants to enter the palace, then I will make way for the king of Bailiang." Mao Bishan and the other Jianghu lackeys all carefully protected the queen and made way for him to enter the palace. Su Fengnian walked up the steps and crossed the threshold. Yu Ruru looked at the back of the handsome man and smiled. The square inside the palace was paved with dark green stones. 2 rows of short peach trees were planted at the foot of the wall. It was unknown what species they were, but they bloomed much earlier than in Jiangnan. The trees were short but had large flowers. The color of the flowers was not the common pink of the Central Plains. The flowers were gold and purple, and the branches were red. It was a sharp contrast to the dark green stones. One could vaguely see many scabbards hanging from the peach trees. When Su Fengnian walked into the square, the Mother of Heaven Queen was sitting on the threshold. She leaned against a pillar, her long skirt dragging on the ground. She turned her head and smiled at the new Prince Liang, who could be called a hothead. Mao Bishan and Gu Feiqing looked at the queen's posture and were surprised. They did not believe that the residents of Dragon King would bow to Bailiang like this. Although the two of them were guests of high status in the residence of Dragon King, they rarely came into contact with confidential matters. However, this was not strange. Even Mao and Gu Feiqing felt that it was natural. The head of a family spent money to buy a dog to guard the house, not to involve it in the housework. Su Fengnian walked to a large stone in the center of the square and used the bottom of his spear to knock on the stone. The sound was sonorous and powerful. Only a tall old man in a goat fur hat walked out of the throne room. Su Fengnian still did not see Kai Junchen's figure. He looked up at the empty-handed old man and said, "Tanghua Embassy, Liang Zhaogo, a top spy. Proficient in qi training and sword formation. I heard that Ruan Shandong died at your hands." The exposed old man looked at Su Fengnian and said in a loud and clear voice, "Ruan Shandong was only a spy placed in Qingcang by Bailiang's aide, Li Yishan. He deserved to die." A cluster of gorgeous peach blossoms shook violently and a person fell heavily from the tree. This slovenly burly man sat on the ground. He accidentally pulled a scabbard and scratched his head with the scabbard. He used the scabbard and scratched his head. And then cursed in a half-baked refugee dialect, "Tanghua Embassy. What? Are you making like old people? I hate you like old. If you want to fight, hurry up." Su Fengnian glanced at the middle-aged man and frowned. It was not difficult for the man to recognize him. However, the spies from Bailiang had not obtained any accurate information about this man. Su Fengnian still guessed his identity. This made Su Fengnian feel that it was a bit troublesome. During the trip to Beimang, Tuoba Chun's son made Su Fengnian suffer a lot. However, the person who left the deepest impression on him was not the youngest son of Tuoba Bodhisattva, but the son of an aristocratic family called Zhong Tan. At that time, there was a woman from the princess tomb who pretended to be his personal maid. Su Fengnian had experienced her bold steel writing skills. Zhong Tan's father was Zhong Shentong, one of the 12 great generals of Beimang. His uncle was Zhong Liang, one of the 10 great devils of Beimang whose true strength was second only to Luo Yang. Zhong Shentong would not give up his position as a great general and come to Qingcang City to make a small fuss. Therefore, he could only be Zhong Liang, who was ranked high and low in the Jianghu of Beimang, depending on his mood. Zhong Liang was a famous romantic figure in Beimang. He was unrestrained and unrestrained. On the path of martial arts, he could easily win against the top experts of the 10 great devils. However, he also dared to lose to some of the soft persimmons, who were ranked at the bottom. The great devil in front of him was 70 to 80% similar to his nephew Zhong Gue, who was killed by Su Fengnian. However, he was more similar to his nephew Zhong Tan. Luo Yang had once said that among the 9 devils behind her, only Zhong Liang could enter her eyes. Su Fengnian turned around and looked at the tall and sturdy man with a thick beard. He smiled and asked, "Zhong Liang?" The man made a sound of surprise and did not deny it. "How do you know me?" The man patted his head and suddenly realized. "Zhong Gue was actually killed by you when you went back to Beimang last time?" No wonder I felt something was wrong when I looked at that girl who was not married yet. When the two of them were talking about how others could not understand the heavenly book, Elder Tang of Qingsong City and Zhao Go of Liyang squatted down silently in the hall of Tanghua, with one hand on the ground. Su Fengnian was lost in thought and turned a blind eye to the movements of the hall of Tanghua. When the land of refugees was in its embryonic form, the warlords were divided, mainly relying on the original family names of Bailiang, and quickly wringing out political power one by one. What followed was an extremely chaotic internal strife. Thus, a large number of tyrannical martial artists with powerful skills like Ruan Shandong, the former lord of Qingsong City, stepped onto the stage. The big fish ate the small fish, and the small fish ate the shrimps. The idle forces were purged and annexed, and from the turmoil to the stability, they encountered an invisible bottleneck and could no longer expand their territory. In the eyes of many people, Ruan Shandong's martial arts cultivation was not bad, but they lost because of their lack of strategy. As a result, people who were good at dealing with political affairs were born, and Kai Junchen was one of them. In terms of martial arts, Mao Bishan and Gu Feiqing could easily kill dozens of Kai Junchen in one breath, but in the end, the one who relied on others' charity was still Mao Gu. However, it did not mean that there were no refugee leaders with both martial arts cultivation and shrewdness. In fact, Ruan Shandong was not as lacking in strategy as the outside world said. It was just that Qingsong City was close to the Southern Dynasty to the north, Bailiang to the east, and there were a few big forces in the west who had bad intentions. Their situation was especially difficult. Not to mention other things, two of the three great consecrators in the residence of the Dragon King, one was Elder Zhao Go, and the other was the devil of Beimang. Su Fengnian knew very well that after his master, Li Yishan, had single-handedly created the situation of hundreds of thousands of refugees, using the shell as a training ground, he had been watching the situation in these years. This strategist saw him as a small world in the great wide world, coldly watching the ants fight for the ant nest. The world was full of strange things. Li Yishan could see everything from the top floor of the Tide Listening Pavilion. Regarding the movements of the refugees, Li Yishan had once written a book, Records of Knowing Autumn. It described in detail the rise and fall of people, gains and losses, so that Su Fengnian, a scholar, could know autumn with a single leaf. Among the strategists of the spring and autumn period, Li Yishan had always been seen as inferior to Nalin Yusi, Zhao Chongling, and the others because of his sinister methods. He received the nickname of Poison Scholar. Many Bailiang old generals even blamed the fact that the general was not willing to establish himself as the emperor and rule on Li Yishan's short-sightedness after Zhao Chongling's death. As to the truth, probably only people like Huang Longshi, Yuan Benshi, and Nalin Yusi could see through it and have the qualifications to make a conclusion about Li Yishan. Su Fengnian felt slightly emotional. After the spring and autumn period, the elusive Huang Longshan set his eyes on West Chu. Yuan Benshi, who had the right time, place and people, set out to set up the two Liao regions. Nalin Yusi, who had no worries, took care of the barbarians in the south. Li Yishan, who was besieged on all sides, let loose hundreds of thousands of refugees. It would probably take a few more years to see which of the four was better at strategizing. This was a true fight between immortals. Zhong Liang's voice interrupted Su Fengnian's thoughts. Su, be careful. Old Tang is trash in close combat. However, if you are 100 feet away from him and he uses the falling flower sword technique, even I would find it difficult to deal with him, much less a finger-profound realm expert. Zhong Liang quickly smiled and said, The reason I am telling you is because I am afraid you will accidentally die early. I do not have the face to take your head back and ask for a reward from Her Majesty the Empress. In the Battle of the Reed Marshes outside Xiongfan City, Wei Shuyang of the Way of the Nine Pecks of Rice had once used a Taoist sword formation to break through the red armor of the Talisman Generals. Even Ancestor Lu had called this an interesting matter for those who wanted to not open a cave. Naturally, it could not be underestimated. Su Fengnian exhaled softly, waiting to see what would happen. Chapter 992. It was easy for Zhong Liang to pretend to be a good person without spending a penny. However, Su Fengnian did not dare to take it lightly. If the sandpiper and the clam fought, the fisherman would benefit. As long as the big devil of the Zhong family could kill him in Qingsong City, it would be a great contribution to Beimang, no matter what method it used. Therefore, Su Fengnian not only had to pay attention to the qi-controlling sword formation of Tanghua Guan, but he also had to pay attention to Zhong Liang, who might take advantage of the situation. Moreover, there was still a consecrator of the residence of Dragon King who was unwilling to show up. Tang Hua Guan pressed one hand on the ground and slowly pulled it up. Then, the sword hanging on the peach tree began to shake. Without exception, the tips of the more than 40 unsheathed swords hanging on the branches all pointed at the uninvited guest in the center of the square. Tang Hua Guan's free hand began to make sword gestures. The gestures were so fast that it was dazzling. Since Su Fengnian had personally experienced the skills of the group of immortals from the Guanyin sect of the South Sea in Yuyan Mountain, he had been paying attention to the path of training qi. Tang Hua Guan's method of condensing qi to kill ghosts at this time should be the ancient Taoist unique skill of the Earth Lung Mountain, Silent Thunder. Purple lightning lingered around Tang Hua Guan's 5 fingers. Although it was naturally much weaker than the thunder pool that Master Lu Hao had created, it was more than enough for him to be a consecrator in Qingcang City. Logically speaking, qi cultivators were like catapults used to attack a city. The power of long-range attacks could be said to be invincible. The right way to do it was to find a chance to fight with them in close quarters. If he just took a beating, he would only be exhausted. Su Fengnian's calm posture made Yu Ruru and the others on the other side of the door sneered at him. They regarded him as a fledgling who only had cultivation but did not know the depth of Jianghu. It was just a layman watching the fun. Experts like Zhong Liang who knew the ropes did not have any sarcastic smile on their faces. This made Queen Yu, who was best at observing people, somewhat uncertain. Mao Bishan and Gu Feiqing were both swordsmen who had made a name for themselves in the scarlet blood of the refugee land. Compared with the swordsmen in the Central Plains, they were much more genuine. At this time, they saw the strange scene of Consecrator Tang's fingers twirling thunder. They could not care less about the scheming in the past. Mao Bishan asked softly, "That guy just watched Consecrator Tang's power to the peak. Is so arrogant. He is so heavy, have something to rely on, or he is ignorant." Gu Feiqing said in a solemn tone, "This vassal lord has a bad reputation. But since he can make that villain Tu leave Bailiang on his own initiative and successfully inherit the throne, I think he is not the superficial person that the outside world says. The former is more likely. Consecrator Tang's technique is mysterious. The king of Bailiang may not be unable to fight him. It is hard to say who will win." Mao Bishan also came to his senses. He twisted his beard and nodded, saying, "Indeed. As long as the brain has not been kicked by a donkey, no one will come to the Qingcang Empire to deliver a good head. I think that the one surnamed Su either has an expert secretly looking after him, or his cultivation is really deep. Not only does he have the sword-controlling technique, but he also has his trump card. Teskeske, I really didn't expect that Tu, who is only a second-grade martial master, would have 2 good sons who are better than him. If you ask me, with this talent and the Tide Listening Pavilion's arsenal, why should he be the king of Bailiang? Wouldn't it be better for him to roam the Jianghu? He can also make the Zhao Emperor feel at ease. Maybe he will be happy and give him a golden plaque with the title #1 in the world. Old Wang likes to claim to be #2. In this way, both of them will be justified." When the Queen of Yu heard this kind of ignorant tone that was similar to a country bumpkin's, she rolled her eyes charmingly. Women were blessed by the heavens and could throw a seductive charm when they rolled their eyes. When Mao Bishan caught a glimpse of the Queen's coquettish eyes, he was almost scared out of his wits. He moved a few steps closer to the door. The woman was sitting on the doorstep. Looking down from a high vantage point, honored guest Mao could clearly see the 2 creases on the woman's chest. Although Mao Bishan's addiction to women in this lifetime was even more difficult to part with than practicing the sword, he had not reached the point where he would forget his life in the face of beauty. He only dared to look at the green-skinned queen right in front of his eyes. Even if Yu Ruru had stripped naked and stood in front of him, no matter how much Mao Bishan lusted after her, he would not dare to touch her. This was the power that was more powerful than any swordsmanship in the world. Mao Bishan learned of this very late and realized it. That was why he would rather be the head of a chicken than the tail of a phoenix. He did not fight for the ranking of the Jianghu experts in his hometown in the old Dongyue. Instead, he came to the land of refugees to help the residents of the Dragon King. Chapter 993. The tip of the sword pointed at the spear. The young man's sheathless sword finally broke free from its shackles and left the peach tree. It pressed down towards the center of the square from the east and west. The hanging swords left their branches and cut off many faint golden and purple petals. It was a beautiful scene. The brilliance of the 40 swords was similar to the lightning that surrounded the Tanghua Pavilion's palm. Su Fengnian was a bit regretful. The flying swords that Dong Tai gave him outside the Shenwu city were destroyed by the human cats. There was a gap in the 24 hours. His lightning sword formation also lost a lot of power. Otherwise, don't look at how aggressive the Tanghua Pavilion's lightning sword formation was. Su Fengnian didn't even need to use the iron spear to move. Using a sword formation to defend against a sword formation, his shield was definitely stronger. Old spy Zhao Guo's spear had no effect. In fact, the essence of the 12 Lingxi sword tomb flying swords was not in the flying swords themselves, but in the sword intent and secret technique that each sword contained. This was an epiphany he had gained when he observed the alternation between day and night on the top of the Dunhuang city tower. Later on, he obtained the Great Qin sword behind the Yellow River Dragon Wall. The 12 Lingxi swords were divine Rui, so he could just destroy a few of the flying swords and rebuild them. Although he had an agreement with the Guanyin sect's Qi refining grandmaster, Dripping Water, and the charcoal girl that sold charcoal, he needed to use the ancient sword that was made of the same material as the wooden horse to forge the 81 talisman swords in Yuyan Villa. Logically speaking, even if he did not use the ancient sword buried in the mausoleum, he could still cut off some of the talisman generals in red armor from the Reed Marsh and Iron Gate Pass and use them to forge the 12. However, Su Fengnian had other plans. In Liangzhou, he had entered the extremely hidden Bailiang machine-making bureau several times. Using his identity as His Royal Highness and the new king of Bailiang, he ordered the machine-making bureau to put down all the work at hand and start a huge project under the leadership of the Master of Moism. However, Second Sister and Chu Lushan had no right to ask about this secret. After Su Weisheng, who had some master-disciple relationship with the Master of Moism, entered Wutong'an, he completely left the machine-making bureau and handed it over to Su Fengnian, who liked to play at the machine-making bureau since childhood. Naturally, no one knew about the young king's plan. Even though Su Fengnian had only been practicing his saber, cultivating his will, and secretly practicing his swordsmanship for the past few years, other than the daughter of the spear immortal Wang Xiu, the instant spear, Su Yanbing, and Han Lao's Han, the two spear experts who could be ranked in the top 3 in the world, he had been influenced by them. Even with an iron spear in his hand, he was still able to make a whistling sound like the wind with the momentum of a thunderbolt. Every time the spear struck out, he would directly smash a sharp sword that was close to him. More than 40 Thunder Sword talisman swords were as weak as paper under the strike of the iron spear. Not only was Tang Huaguan's expression solemn, but the two guests, Queen Yu Ruru and Mao Gu, also had their eyes opened. Zhongliang was still calm and composed. The peach blossoms around him were torn apart by the sword aura and danced all over the sky. He casually picked up a few petals in front of him and threw them into his mouth to chew. Then, the great demon saw a sword being pierced towards his head by the iron spear. The Beimeng expert, whose mouth was full of peach blossoms, sneered vaguely and allowed the flying sword, which was tainted with the aura of the talisman, to stab straight towards his head. He did not expect that when the tip of the sword was about to touch Zhongliang's glabella, not only did Zhongliang not move at all, but there was also not even the slightest flow of qi. The flying sword actually spun around cheerfully like a swallow returning to its nest. It kept circling around Zhongliang's shoulders until the spiritual qi on the sword dissipated and it fell to the ground. On this point, not to mention Yu Ruru, Mao Bishan and Gu Feiqing, the two sword experts, even the qi cultivator Tang Huaguan could not understand the mystery. Only Su Fengnian knew. There was once a rumor in the Jianghu that there was a dragon girl in the South Sea whose swordsmanship was godly. The wind was strong and the waves were fast, and her sword could travel 10,000 miles. The barefoot young woman, nicknamed the Charcoal Girl, had once shown such a skill that was similar to Zhongliang's in Yuyan Mountain Villa. At that time, even Su Fengnian's flying sword, which had a complete sword embryo, was unusually docile and almost changed sides. It was all thanks to the Charcoal Girl's sword embryo, which was a once-in-a-century sword embryo. She was born to make famous swords feel close to her, as if they were meeting an old friend. Su Fengnian's original intention was to test the situation slightly and roughly confirm the strength of the demon. He did not expect Zhongliang to be so honest and openly reveal his sword embryo talent. Tang Huaguan's lips moved slightly as he silently chanted a spell. He pressed down with both hands and the second wave of flying swords flew out from the depths of the residence of Dragon King. There were only 50 or so swords. However, Su Fengnian really had the capital to underestimate the scale of this sword formation. He once had a magnificent feat of borrowing swords from Yuyan Mountain Villa and used thousands of snowflakes as swords. Tang Huaguan's sword formation was originally based on talismans and spells. In the eyes of today's famous swordsman, this was naturally an insignificant skill. Su Fengnian's underestimation was one thing, but he did not forget to secretly learn the falling banner loathing and impeachment technique from the demon-slaying platform of Mount Longhu. However, at that time, the great immortal Qi Xianxia had used the sky thunder as a banner to suppress several sky demons in Mount Zhulu. Tang Huaguan's loathing and impeachment technique was just a copy. It was probably not even 1,000th of the majesty of the demon-slaying platform on the Lotus platform. When Zhong Liang saw Su Fengnian's curved spear technique, he was surprised. Back then, one of the four grandmasters, Wang Xiao, went deep into Beimang's hinterland as if there was no one there. Countless heroes of Beimang died under Wang Xiao's four-words formula. The two-words formula of Bang Tuar and Drag were already a complete mess. The third-word formula of curved spear technique was even more frightening. Zhong Liang had wandered the Jianghu for many years and his martial arts were especially diverse. He was also a rare martial arts genius and was the only person in Beimang whose aptitude was better than his own. Unfortunately, Zhong Liang was born unrestrained and did not have a fixed nature. He rarely took a fancy to things that people valued. Not only did he have no love for power, he also followed his interest in martial arts. This was why he could not be ranked among the top 10 masters in the world. Zhong Liang rubbed his eyelids with both hands and said with a smile, "It really is Wang Xiao's curved word formula. Good boy, you can learn whatever you want. You have my style." Zhong Liang stared at it for a while and then turned his head to the queen on the other side of the door and made a gesture to ask for an iron spear. 3 arcs formed a force, 3 forces formed a small circle, 3 small circles formed a large circle, growing and multiplying endlessly. Back then, Wang Xiao had used the curved word formula to fight with one of the 4 grandmasters, the talisman general Jia Ren, for 3 days and 3 nights. It was said that Wang Xiao's last arc encompassed a radius of 3 miles, killing all the birds and leaving not even a blade of grass alive. When the curved spear technique does not arc, I will die. For the first time, Zhong Liang, who had been hiding his identity in the land of refugees, felt an itch to fight. Su Fengnian's curved spear technique contained the collapsing thunder technique and the dragging spear technique. The horizontal and vertical sword formations of the Tanghua Pavilion could not withstand it. Su Fengnian's curved spear technique had already covered the entire square. Yu Ruru and the others could only see the peach blossoms spinning rapidly along with the dense gang qi. Su Fengnian twisted the spear around his body and used the Beimang demon lord Duanbo Er's famous lightning spear technique. Internally, he used the qi-controlling technique of the Wu family's sword tomb and externally, he used Wang Xiao's collapsing word formula to throw the spear at the great consecrator of the residence of the Dragon King. After throwing the spear, Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and felt a little incredulous. This old consecrator's desperate actions were too hasty. Other people would be desperate to escape, but this old spy Zhao Go actually held his sword without any regard for his life and allowed the spear to pierce through his abdomen. Like an arrow at the end of its flight, he leapt up and stabbed at Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian leaned to the side to avoid the sword. He gently stretched out an arm that was faintly wrapped in red silk and pressed down on Tanghua Pavilion's head, forcing him to kneel in front of him. Before dying, Tanghua Pavilion, who was bleeding from his 7 orifices, moved his lips with difficulty. There was no hatred in his eyes. Instead, there was a sense of relief. The old man silently uttered his last words. 2 words. Childish. Go. Chapter 994. Su Fengnian was confused. Most of the command of the mad dog Zhao Go, who had been used by Li Yang to eliminate dissidents, was originally in the hands of a relative of Empress Zhao Ji. Could it be that the old spy from the Tanghua embassy had received Zhao Ji's secret order? But how could Zhao Ji be a woman with a bodhisattva's heart? The friendship between the Su and Zhao families was actually divided into 2 parts. One was between Su Shao and the previous emperor, and the other was between Su Fengnian's mother and Zhao Ji. However, both of these had disappeared outside of the Zhouzhou embassy the last time Su Fengnian entered the capital. Furthermore, between the land of refugees and the Zhao family of Liyang was the majestic Beiliang. How could it be Zhao Ji's turn to give orders? Su Fengnian was suddenly shocked. He even dared to refuse the emperor's imperial edict. Although he didn't care about Zhao Ji's scheming, perhaps he had miscalculated one thing. This made Su Fengnian feel a trace of unease. However, at this time, he couldn't change his plan at the last minute. At most, he would use the stupidest method. Counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. Let's see who is the mantis and who is the oriole at the end. At the door, Gu Feiqing threw an iron spear to Zhongliang, who was inside the door. The breeding demon waited for a moment before skillfully brandishing the spear. The body of the spear trembled in a subtle arc that was pleasing to the eye. With the spear in his hand, Zhongliang's aura suddenly changed. He was no longer the carefree wild crane that did not care about anything. He dragged the spear and walked forward. Zhongliang's footsteps were irregular, sometimes fast and sometimes slow. It seemed like he was following his heart. In a few blinks of an eye, he had arrived in front of Su Fengnian without saying a word. Holding the end of the iron spear in his hand, he swung it in a straight arc, smashing the whip towards Su Fengnian's forehead. Su Fengnian was not stupid enough to use both hands to block the attack. The iron spear in his hand, which was of the same standard as Zhongliang's, drew an arc diagonally. Under the collision of the two spears, Su Fengnian immediately threw the iron spear out of his hand. He did not try to receive the impact of the collision on the iron spear, but he did not let it leave his hand for too long. Before the iron spear was knocked to the ground by the breeding demon, he immediately grabbed the iron spear that only had a lingering aura left in it. From an outsider's point of view, Su Fengnian had always held the iron spear tightly, clashing with Zhongliang head-on. Although Su Fengnian had used some tricks to avoid the first wave of dangerous aura pouring out of the iron spear like a flood, the vigorous internal force that Zhongliang had given the iron spear to the iron spear was unexpectedly huge. After holding the iron spear, Su Fengnian had no choice but to shake his wrist to use the burst formula to disperse the lingering aura on the spear. However, in a fight between masters, it was rare to see spear immortal Wang Xiao and talisman General Jia entangled with each other day and night like this. Usually, one wrong step after another would determine the outcome of the battle. It was only after Su Fengnian used the collapse formula that he managed to dispel the force from his iron spear. Zhongliang continued to press forward with the momentum of the Wang Xiao vertical arc, forcing Su Fengnian, who had no room to maneuver, to maintain the defensive posture of the horizontal spear. Once again, Su Fengnian forcefully withstood the arc. Last time, Su Fengnian used a trick, but this time, it was Zhongliang's turn. The arc formula was true, but because of the collapse formula, a large cloud of gang qi exploded from the tip of the spear. The hard iron spear in Zhongliang's hand was curved into an unimaginably soft semicircle, and the tip of the spear was pointed at Su Fengnian's face. The distance between them was 1 foot, and the gang qi was 1 foot long. Su Fengnian could either take the full force of the iron spear arc word formula, or take the risk and try to break the gang qi of the collapse word formula, with the flying sword in his sleeve. Su Fengnian chose the former without hesitation. Showing off his sword-controlling technique to a sword embryo was tantamount to playing with fire. Su Fengnian took a step back. As his body slid backwards, he bent his knees slightly to disperse the majestic qi of Zhongliang's collapse word formula. Zhongliang held the iron spear in his hand. He was not in a hurry to beat up Su Fengnian, who had fallen into the water. He only followed like a shadow and kept the tip of the spear a foot away from Su Fengnian's eyes. He did not even immediately use the collapse word formula, which had an immediate effect. His gang qi was about to appear. This great devil who was ranked second in Beimang was recklessly mocking Su Fengnian. The reason why Zhongliang was able to come up with a spear immortal secret technique that was on par with Su Fengnian's was because of his innate talent. More importantly, he had a high-profile battle in Beimang 2 years ago. His opponent was Deng Mao, who had become one of the top 10 fighters in the world. Zhongliang's deep understanding of spear techniques was on par with Su Fengnian's. However, on the surface, Su Fengnian only had level 2 internal force, which was a huge gap compared to Zhongliang's. Zhongliang was not one of those otherworldly experts who only knew how to fight behind closed doors. As a result, Su Fengnian's defeat was a matter of course. In terms of innate talent, Su Fengnian was not as good as the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat, who thought he was #1 in the world from the moment he held a sword. He was not as good as Shenyuan Jingqing, who only knew how to read and became a Confucian sage. He was not as good as the woman who inexplicably cultivated the sword-controlling jade mystic while practicing calligraphy. He was not as good as the coal girl who was born with the sword immortal embryo. There were many more. Su Fengnian would lose to Zhongliang and these Jianghu playboys. But when it came to risking one's life, Su Fengnian might not be better than them, but he was at least not inferior. When Su Fengnian retreated from the 2 peach trees and was about to lean against the palace wall, he stopped retreating. He drew a small arc with his spear, as if he was risking his life to kill Zhong Liang in an arc. Zhong Liang was very calm and did not withdraw his spear. He took the opportunity to slowly push the tip of the spear forward half a foot. It was actually Su Fengyan's desperation to trade his life for Zhong Liang's. It was as if this time he was aggressive and did not intend to win a complete victory, so he deliberately hid his strength. He was gambling on whether Su Fengyan dared to trade his life for his life. Su Fengyan did not hesitate. His arc spear continued to move forward, but at the same time, his left hand grasped the embroidered winter saber on his left waist. This saber was given to him by White Fox Face. It could be regarded as Su Fengyan's most intimate lover. It accompanied him on 2 trips to Liang and Beimang. When Su Fengyan, who was on the path of cultivating his mind, held the embroidered winter saber, it was a completely different scene. It was as if the unarmed second minister of offerings of the residence of Dragon King had become a demon with a spear. Chapter 995. Zhong Liang's eyes grew colder, and the flow of qi in his body grew faster and faster. Thousands of thoughts appeared in his mind. At the critical moment of exchanging his life, this boy still did not want to escape by using unorthodox methods. Instead, he was afraid that the curved spear would cut through his waist and kill him. Would he only be at ease if he added another blow before he died? Did this boy really not think of the king of Beiliang as some kind of vassal king? Did he really have the determination to die together? Zhong Liang's gaze instantly turned hot, and he was no longer careless. The gang qi at the tip of the spear was like a burning charcoal that had been thrown out of a furnace. At the same time that Su Fengyan's iron spear swept past Zhong Liang, the demonic breeding head spear tip, along with the gang qi, smashed into the space between Su Fengyan's eyebrows. In a flash, even Zhong Liang, who was unparalleled in martial arts, was sent flying 30 feet away. However, he still could not escape unscathed, and a wound deep enough to see bone appeared on his shoulder. Zhong Liang looked at the young man who had crashed into the palace wall. His end was even more miserable than his. He had already thrown away his iron spear, but his saber had also returned to its scabbard. There was a scarlet spot between his eyebrows, and the space between his eyes was a mess of flesh and blood. However, there were red threads like slender red snakes crawling from his sleeves to his arms, then up from his neck, and up from his temples to his eyebrows. It was a terrifying sight. Zhong Liang was clearly somewhat annoyed. He muttered, "His saber technique is a bit like Gu Jiantong's half-baked thunder of mind. Could this dragon attachment technique be a human cat's Xianxia?" Zhong Liang sighed and looked with pity at the new King Liang who had surprised him. "If I had known, I would have put in more effort. Perhaps you could have done better. Unfortunately, there's nothing for me to do now." The ruler of Qingcang, Zhou Junchen, was holed up in the throne room. One hand was propped up against a gold-painted pillar, and the other hand was gripping the dragon jade pendant at his waist. His expression was nervous. He knew that he was only a puppet. The 3 masters all seemed to grant Qingcang's requests on the surface, but no one really took him seriously. Zhou Junchen stared at the back of an old man with his hands tucked in his sleeves. The old man was the 3rd master of the house. He was from Nanjiang and was proficient in poisons and witchcraft. Not only was he good at killing and saving people, his methods of torturing people were even more bizarre. Until now, Zhou Junchen had not figured out the exact origins of the 3 masters. Qingcang spies had always existed in name only. It was not that Zhou Junchen did not want to do his best in this area, but that he did not have the power to do so. Qingcang was struggling at death's door in the middle of several powerful forces. Zhou Junchen had already racked his brains to buy hundreds of sets of armor and military equipment. For a small dynasty in a time of chaos, there were 2 things that truly measured the power of a country. They were not the training of retainers, the raising of lackeys, or the construction of noble mansions. The first was the practice of training soldiers for 1,000 days to use them in a single day. That was the number of armors the soldiers wore. Training soldiers was a bottomless pit, and using soldiers was even more so. It was fine if they won a battle, but if they lost, they would lose everything. It was very easy to drag down a government that was independent but had an unstable foundation. The second was the collection of military secrets. This was a gold-swallowing pitio that consumed a lot of money. Many of the words in the secret letters were exchanged with blood and human lives. Previously, the head of the spies in the residence of Dragon King swore that the young vassal king invaded the territory alone, and that Beiliang did not have any large-scale military movements. Zhou Junchen's original intention was to sound out the young vassal king before sitting down to enjoy wine and beauties and have a good talk with him. If the young vassal king of the Liang dynasty was sincere, Zhou Junchen did not mind being a provincial governor under Bailiang or even a general with real power. If he was not sincere, it would not be too late to shed all pretense of cordiality and kill him. Unfortunately, first, the old man from the Tanghua Club insisted on using the talisman matrix that was the most expensive item in the residence of Dragon King. Then, the third Minister of Offerings and Jiang Heng, the general of the cavalry troop, agreed. The second Minister of Offerings, Liang Zhong, who claimed to be a remnant of the spring and autumn period but spoke with a Beimang accent, chose to stand by and do nothing. This completely ruined Zhou Junchen's wishful thinking. He could only hope that the Su Fengnian outside the palace was dead. It would be best if the Bailiang was in turmoil and collapse. Otherwise, he could only flee to the more barren and desolate western region with a group of bodyguards. Zhou Junchen sighed and turned back to look at the golden dragon throne. He then turned his head and stood on tiptoe to look at the scenery outside the hall. He was lost in thought. Then, Zhou Junchen felt his scalp tingle. He turned around with difficulty and saw 3 men and a woman he had never seen before. 2 of them were adult men and a pair of young boy and girl. The young boy was a little fat and was rolling around on the spacious dragon throne. He seemed to be enjoying the feeling of rolling on the dragon throne. The young girl was not a beauty either. Her appearance was average. Fortunately, a fair complexion covered all her ugliness. If she was placed in the crowd of beauties and palace maids in the residence of Dragon King, Zhou Junchen, who was not happy without meat, would not even look at her. The young girl was squatting beside the dragon throne. She opened her mouth and took a big bite, as if to verify whether the dragon throne was made of gold. Zhou Junchen could ignore this pair of naughty children, but the 2 men who were about 10 years apart in age were intimidating. The slightly younger man had a majestic figure and was born with a vision of having eyes but no pupils. It was not accurate to say that he was blind. A short man dressed in the attire of the Northern Mang Northern Dynasty stood beside the majestic man, leaving Zhou Junchen with a rough side profile. He extended a hand and stroked the dragon throne. His stroke was extremely slow, as if he was yearning and ridiculing. Zhou Junchen, who was dressed in a yellow dragon robe, swallowed his saliva. He did not even dare to breathe loudly, let alone scold him. The short man smiled and did not look at Zhou Junchen. He asked softly, "Is this dragon throne bigger or smaller than the one in the throne room of Liang?" Zhou Junchen knew a little about the Beimang language and replied cautiously, "It's much smaller." The man nodded and withdrew his hand that was stroking the dragon throne. He turned to face Zhou Junchen. Half of his face was covered with scars. He rubbed the scars on his face with his thumb. Seeing this scene, Zhou Junchen remembered a rumor and was shocked. He staggered back a few steps. When the Northern Liang cavalry went the furthest north, there was a young military genius from the Northern Mang who was born in the Northern Dynasty's imperial family. He pushed the roaming cavalry's invasion and plundering to the extreme, and with a small number of troops, he beat the 2 great generals of Liang who were still alive on the eastern front until their faces were covered in grime. In the end, he dared to rush to the western front to provide assistance, and had several direct confrontations with the Northern Liang cavalry that were like a hot knife through butter. Not only did he not fall into a disadvantage, he even had a slight advantage. This continued until he was at a place called Pure Gold, where he was set up by Li Yishan to the point of death. He was entangled by a fatty surnamed Chu who was also adept at lone troops and roaming cavalry. Both sides had 3,000 cavalry each. They circled around each other and attacked each other, slaughtering each other for an entire 800 li. In the end, this Northern Mangsek's general did not have a single soldier left, and the one surnamed Chu was not much better off, only having 80 or so cavalry left. That battle to the death that shook the millions of troops on both the eastern and western fronts was not enough to make the final decision, but it was enough to make all the generals sigh in admiration. At the same time, this ordinary-looking man was the most proper descendant of Beimang. He was the younger brother of Murong Empress from a different mother, Murong Bao Ding. Murong half-faced Buddha was all thanks to the current Bailiang Protector General Chu Lushan. This person was not only a great genius in the art of war, he was also fully deserving of the title of martial prodigy. He was not at the Great Vajra realm, but he was better than the Great Vajra realm. He had an invincible golden body and was a white-clothed monk comparable to the 2 Zen temples. Murong Bao Ding, the head of the Beimang Orange Prefecture, saw Zhou Junchen's cowardice and laughed, You recognize him? Then the short man pointed at the handsome man with no pupils beside him. You should be afraid of him. He is the leader of the Rurin Three Towns Cavalry, Hong Jingyan. Hong Jingyan? Although he had been demoted from the fourth world to the sixth world by the greatest demon in the world, wasn't the sixth world still an expert? Murong Baoding, who was also one of the top 10 experts in the world, was also here. What did it mean for the two of them to stand together in the Azure continent? Zhou Junchen, who was very afraid of death, already understood that life and death were up to fate. There was only one thought in his mind. The king of Bailiang outside the hall is dead for sure. Chapter 996. Zhou Junchen was not surprised that Zhou Junchen had such thoughts. In his opinion, one of the best soldiers in the army of Bailiang, the villain too, had already betrayed Bailiang and became the free and happy king of Shu. Yuan Baixiong was now the commander of the cavalry, with a high position and heavy responsibility. He would not come to the refugee land to kill a chicken with a knife. Even Han Lao's Han, the personal retainer of old King Liang's junior fellow apprentice Immortal of Spear, had become the general of Lingzhou or the deputy general. Thinking of this, Zhou Junchen felt a little sad. Compared to the young king outside the palace, he would not have a better ending. The young man risked his life alone and tried to show enough sincerity to recruit Qing Tsang. It was a good idea and there was a possibility of success. At least, Zhou Junchen believed that he would be tempted by a provincial governor or a general. However, Zhou Junchen reckoned that there must have been a fatal flaw in one of the espionage segments and the Northern Mang knew about the heavenly secret. Otherwise, the short journey from Liangzhou to the Qingtsang would not have required the joint efforts of the Zhu province and the Rurin to mobilize so many people. The key point was that they had timed their movements so accurately. Thinking of this, Zhou Junchen found some joy in his misery. He thought to himself, our Qingtsang's espionage is like a piece of tofu. Your rich northern Liang doesn't seem to be any better. At the thought of being in the same boat as the king of Bailiang, Zhou Junchen's gloomy mood brightened a little. But when the Lord of Azure saw the scene in the main hall, her heart sank to the bottom. After the dragon chair was bitten by the girl like a hungry dog, she lost interest and stood beside Beimang Baoding, holding a delicately woven silk food bag and stuffing pieces of pastries that she bought from Beimang's Nanchao market into her mouth. The little fatty was like a money grubber with a brain problem, crawling and rolling on the dragon chair, pinching and pinching, his eyes shining. After jumping off the dragon chair, he wanted to carry it away. But how could a dragon chair that weighed 1,000 pounds be so easy to carry? The young man was obviously very angry. With his back facing Zhou Junchen, he spread out his hands and suddenly pressed them on the dragon chair's two dragon heads. The golden dragon chair that was shining with a golden light instantly melted into a large pool of golden liquid at an astonishing speed, as if ice and snow were being roasted by a raging fire. The golden liquid that was used as a cushion on the steps was burned into a dazzling fire. The little fatty's boots and trousers were burned into nothing, but he himself was not injured at all. The young man fiercely fell to the ground with a plop and grabbed a handful of golden liquid. His eyes greedy. When the golden liquid flowed down the jade steps, it was originally going to pass by where the girl, Murong Baoding, and Hong Jingyan were standing, but the girl coldly snorted, and then with her as the center, the boiling golden liquid froze into a circle of gold in the blink of an eye. The girl's body was shrouded in mist, revealing a hint of frost. The girl was still angry, probably because she was angry that the fatty of the same age was obsessed with money. She ignored the golden liquid under her feet that did not decrease in temperature and directly took a series of small steps, one foot stepping on the young man's butt, causing him to fall into the boiling golden liquid. The young man turned his head to glare at her, but he quickly turned his face back to the ground, his hands cheerfully continuously hugging the golden liquid above his head. The girl's cheeks were puffed up as she chewed on some stiff pastries. She stepped on the fat boy's fat and ugly buttocks one by one, splashing a large amount of golden liquid. The golden liquid condensed into golden ice cubes of different sizes in midair, falling into the golden liquid and melting again. Seeing this, Zhou Junchen's face turned pale as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. Where did Beimang find such a pair of water and fire freaks? Murong half-faced Buddha and Hong Jingyan were enough to turn Qingtsang City upside down. With the addition of this pair of demons of unknown origin, not to mention the small Qingtsang City, they could even kill their way in and out of the heavily guarded prince's mansion in Mount Qingliang several times. Murong Baoding walked down the steps and came to Zhou Junchen's side. He laughed softly and said, "If Bailiang knew that their new master had died in your house after only a few days of succession, what would you do?" Zhou Junshan's mind turned quickly. He carefully responded with his awkward and unpleasant northern Beimang dialect. Is there a place that will take me in? The governor of Beimang, who was half a head shorter than Zhou Junshan, smiled and slowly said, Beimang is far from being as rich as Liang's central plains, but there are still many fertile grasslands. Compared to the land of refugees, it is still more suitable for living. This King's Orange province is one of the few rich places in Beimang. What's so difficult about taking in a few Zhou Junshan? However, if you, Zhou Junshan, want to go to Beimang and continue living the life of a local tyrant, it won't be easy. The key is that under the leadership of the residents of the Dragon King, there will be tens of thousands of refugees in Qingcang who will migrate to Beimang. This king has come to the south this time to kill the king of Beiliang. However, if you, Zhou Junshan, can make a contribution to this king can also go with you to the empress to ask for a reward. It might even be possible to get a purple gold fish pouch. I'm sure you know that there are less than 60 purple gold fish pouches in the entire Beimang. Even Hong Jingyan, who holds the Ruran army of 3 towns, only received one recently. Zhou Junshan looked troubled. The difficult part of governing a land of refugees was that the refugees here never believed in propriety, justice, integrity, or shame. They especially didn't know how to write the word loyalty. Here, brothers turning against each other was common. Even father and son turning against each other and killing each other wasn't rare. In order to control the refugees, one could only use force to subdue them. There was no such thing as using virtue to subdue them. Whoever had more soldiers and horses and brighter armor would be able to defecate and piss on the heads of others. Zhou Junshan's jurisdiction was centered around the ancient military town of Qingcang, which had a population of 20,000. The influence of the residents of the Dragon King, the Zhou family, would begin to decline sharply once they left the city. If news of the residents of the Dragon King being destroyed were to spread, as long as the refugees outside the city knew that it wasn't an imminent disaster, they would just pick their noses and continue with what they were doing. They couldn't be bothered to care about whether the residents of the Dragon King was surnamed Zhou or something else. In addition to the less than 2,000 dragon scale army, under Zhou Junshan's command, he didn't have the confidence to bring more people to Beimang, even if it was the 4,000 or 5,000 bodyguards under the command of his trusted generals. For the refugees, life in this world was like this. No matter how hard it was, it couldn't get any harder. They were used to being frogs at the bottom of a well in the land of refugees. They didn't even want to wander elsewhere. Therefore, the spread of Buddhism in the land of refugees was far deeper and more extensive than that of Confucianism and Taoism. Since they couldn't pin their hopes on riches and honor in this life, they might as well endure more hardships and endure all the hardships in their next life in hopes of being reincarnated into a good family in their next life. In the land of refugees that was full of disasters, those who could wander alone and stably were not martial arts masters who relied on their strength to bully others. Only those ascetic monks who were as poor as the refugees. Zhou Junshan didn't dare to make a promise on the spot. Murong Baoding obviously knew the unique circumstances of the land of refugees, so he didn't make things difficult for Zhou Junshan. He laughed softly and said, "You have your difficulties. This king can understand. In the eyes of ordinary refugees, even if they went to Beimang, even if they ate and drank well for a while, they might have to work for Beimang someday. Once the War of Liangmang starts, the first batch of people to die will be them who defected. In other words, if you rely on Beiliang, it's the same logic. The only difference is whether you will die under Beimang's arrows or under Beiliang's horse's hooves. Since that's the case, it's naturally better to continue hiding in the land of refugees. Beimang, Beiliang, they won't go anywhere. There's a saying in your country that it's better to live than to die. It's referring to the hundreds of thousands of refugees who can get on their horses and fight." Zhou Junshan smiled flatteringly and said, "The commandant has already seen through the affairs of the world. If the military power of Beimang is in the hands of the commandant, the imperial court of Zhao can only bow and obey." Murong Baoding said calmly, "Although you're flattering against your will, you're right about this king's thoughts. Tuoba Bodhisattva's so-called god of war is only a talent in military affairs. He's just a mediocre talent. Dong Zhuo is more capable in military affairs. But no matter how capable he is, no matter how well he mingles, it's just the fate of Liang Su Shao. It's a pity that Dong Zhuo's rise came too late. The great generals of the southern dynasty who were ranked before him can still hold on for many years. Fatty Dong may not be able to smoothly reach the day when his meritorious service is so great that he can't be conferred the title of emperor." Zhou Junchen's scalp tingled. With a bitter face, he said in a low voice, "The commandant doesn't need to tell me these heavenly secrets. I'm short-sighted and my knowledge is shallow. Anyway, I don't understand." Murong Baoding, whose half-face was ferocious and terrifying, twitched the corner of his mouth. He patted Zhou Junchen's shoulder with one hand and said, "Don't worry. The current situation in the land of refugees is very delicate. The gains and losses of both sides of Liangmang have to be calculated by double. This king has recruited Zhou Junchen, so Beiliang will have one less Zhou Junchen. In the future, they will have to face General Zhou, who has a purple gold fish bag around his waist. This kind of business where even women and children know the pros and cons. This king won't be so muddle-headed as to let his emotions affect his decisions. When this prince was young, I once said that I wanted to pile the corpses of all the refugees on Mount Qingliang. At that time, I was young and impetuous, so I never cared about the general trend. I always thought that I could single-handedly turn the tide and suffered a lot." The young man and young woman had unknowingly run to their side. Most of the fat boy's clothes had been destroyed by the golden water. He directly took off the clothes on his back and made a skirt. He tied it around his waist, barely covering his crotch and white buttocks. The young man looked at Zhou Junchen, who was incomparably fearful, and asked with a smile, "Sir, do you have any money or treasure?" Zhou Junchen's face stiffened as he untied the suet jade that was said to have been obtained from the top of Mount Kunlun. Unexpectedly, the young man whose chest was stained with golden water only glanced at it and was greatly disappointed. He hurriedly asked, "It has to be like that chair. It has to be golden and shiny. Otherwise, it's worthless." Zhou Junchen looked helplessly at Murong Baoding, but the latter ignored him and moved away to whisper to Hong Jingyan. Misfortune never came alone. Before one wave had subsided, another wave arose. The average-looking young woman also walked in front of Zhou Junchen and coldly threatened, "Do you have anything to eat? If not, I'll turn you into an ice corpse." A money grubber and a foodie? Chapter 997. Zhou Junchen, who was still the emperor of Qingcang yesterday, was at a loss. He almost begged the two children to stop torturing him. When Hong Jingyan was talking to Murong Baoding, he looked at the young man and woman who were secretly regarded as national treasures by Beimang. The qi cultivators of the Central Plains were divided into the north and south. The south was led by the Guanyin sect in the South Sea. The north was concentrated in the imperial astronomer. Any noble who dared to raise a qi cultivator, even if the Zhao family's emperor was known for his tolerance, would definitely be sentenced to death. Li Mixi had once learned that the dragon-seeking qi cultivators of the northern sect had been working for the celestial phenomenon cultivator Lu Hao all these years. But he did not know if they were helping him enter the Saint Realm or building some kind of formation in Great Peace City. There were not many qi cultivators in the northern Mang. At their peak, there were only about 100 of them. Their numbers might not even be comparable to the Guanyin sect. Now, 9 out of 10 of them were dead. This tragedy was due to Murong Baoding finding his biological brother and sister. The two of them were given the surnames of Yelu and Murong respectively. One was called Yelu Kai-in, while the other was called Murong Kai-yang. They were the living knife Gui bait, recorded in the secret manual of the qi cultivators. It was said that if one ate one of the two, they could either enter the heavens or the underworld. However, Murong Baoding had never believed in such things. At that time, he had offered it to his sister, the Empress of the Northern Mang. The latter had also scoffed at the Taoist talk of immortality and ascension. As for the ownership of the brother and sister, she had jokingly said to his younger brother, "If you don't take what is given to you by the heavens, you will suffer a calamity instead." She had even given it to the Orange Prefecture. The Empress had even used the power of the entire country to allow the brother and sister to become qi cultivators of the Northern Mang by chance. Yelu Kai-in was good at controlling fire, while Murong Kai-yang could make the summer river instantly form a long bridge of ice. Murong Baoding smiled and asked, "Do you think Zhong Liang can kill that young man?" Hong Jingyan said calmly, "Zhong Liang is frivolous and doesn't know how to cherish his talent. At most, his state is similar to that of the fifth raccoon. In a one-on-one battle, Zhong Liang has a high chance of winning. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that he can kill." Murong Baoding took the lead and walked to the door of the hall. "He is related to the demon Luo Yang. Don't you have any thoughts?" Hong Jingyan said something mysterious. "If I want to kill him, I'm afraid that the Orange Province will stop me." Murong Baoding laughed it off and changed the subject. Beimeng, Liang and Bailiang, a tripartite balance of power. Originally, as long as Su Xiao did not die, the other two sides would have to obediently follow Bailiang's orders. At that time, Liang wished that the young heir apparent would die prematurely. They carried out many assassinations, hoping that Bailiang would die the second time. Later, beyond everyone's expectations, Bailiang quietly settled the general situation. Su Fengnian's hereditary succession could not be stopped. Then Chen Zhibao entered the capital. Following his resignation as the Minister of War, he was conferred the title of King of Western Shu. As a result, Beimeng, who had been watching the fun, became anxious. Last year, they were beaten by Bailiang to the bone. There were countless civil and military officials in the northern and southern dynasties, but only the Orange Province and Dongjua insisted on fighting on the western front. They insisted on fighting head-on with the new king of Bailiang and Chen Zhibao in western Shu. As a result, Li Mibi's spiderweb shifted its focus from this king and these people to Su Fengnian, hoping to kill the new king who no longer had Su Xiao to rely on. At that time, Bailiang would have no leader and would be much easier to bully. Since it was more or less certain that Su Fengnian would not rebel, Liang Xiaogo would have to pinch his nose and risk his life to protect Su Fengnian from dying at the hands of Beimeng, so as to avoid missing the northwestern gateway. It was really a big joke. With Bailiang's 300,000 cavalry being used up against the southern court, and with Chen Zhibao glaring at western Shu, it would be much more difficult to carry out the peace edict's plan of east-west confrontation. Even if it succeeded according to the peace edict, it would cost more than 200,000 lives. Perhaps this is the power of the man called Yuan Benshi in Great Peace City. Scholars move their mouths, and warriors die on the battlefield. In the current situation of the romance of the Three Kingdoms, Bailiang doesn't move, and Beimeng and Liang don't dare to act rashly. Unknowingly, 20 years of peace have been exchanged for the common people of the two dynasties. This is all thanks to Li Yishan. It's a pity that this enemy is dead, and there's no way to tell him face to face. This king has a belly full of words, and he can only nag and nag to you, Hong Jingyan. Hong Jingyan smiled. Fortunately, there's still Chu Lushan. Murong Baoding stretched out his hand and placed it on his cheek. Yes, there's still Chu Lushan. The two had already stepped through the threshold of the main hall. Looking at the somewhat lonely scene in the square, Hong Jingyan suddenly said, Su Yanbing secretly escorting the young king is a reasonable thing. This person's methods of intercepting and rescuing the Bailiang administrator's son at the border cannot be underestimated. If it wasn't for the peace edict, I really don't have the confidence to kill people in Qingcang. Since Su Yanbing hasn't shown himself, it means that it's as I guessed before. Zhongliang really can't kill Su Fengnian. First, there's the butcher Su Xiao who doesn't want to be the emperor, Chen Zhibao who wants to settle the country through 2 battles, and then there's the traitor Chu Lushan. Now, there's the Su Fengnian who likes to pull chestnuts out of the fire. Bailiang really has a lot of strange people and strange things. If you ask me, Bailiang really should follow the plan of the emperor's preceptor and destroy it first. Murong Baoding's words hit the nail on the head. If you don't attack the nearby Bailiang, how can you compete with Dongjua for military merits? How can you be the king of the southern courtyard? Hong Jingyan also argued, is the peace edict really going to do business with Bailiang? Chapter 998. Murong Baoding laughed and said bluntly, as long as this kid agrees, and as long as you, Hong Jingyan, do not meddle, the king of the northern courtyard will be his in the future, and the king of the southern courtyard will be yours. When Beimeng pacifies the world, your northern and southern courtyards will no longer be defined by the current Beimeng northern and southern dynasties, but by the current Beimeng Liang. Hong Jingyan, do you think he will agree? Su Fengnian entered the city alone as a show of sincerity. This king even traveled thousands of miles south to this land of refugees, and spared his life. His sincerity should not be small, right? Hong Jingyan said indifferently, if Su Fengnian can recruit hundreds of thousands of refugees, he will be able to secure his position as the king of Bailiang. Similarly, if he can tame 300,000 cavalrymen, he will be able to smoothly proclaim himself as the emperor after his majesty ascends to the heavens. But before that, if I go against his majesty, not only will I lose the Ruran military power that I just obtained, but I will also follow in Luo Yang's footsteps and be hunted down. On the surface, why don't we just follow his majesty's orders and kill Su Fengnian and let him accompany his father? Then, we will rely on our own abilities to fight for people, food, and territory in Bailiang. When the time comes, whoever can destroy Western Shu will be crowned as the king. Murong Baoding interrupted Hong Jingyan's words and sneered. That old woman won't be able to live for much longer. You know very well just how much the Yelu clan, the previous ruler of the northern Mang, hates her. If you don't let me take over, the Murong clan will have to take the risk of the Yelu clan digging up my ancestral graves. The old woman is very wary of this younger brother of Ben Wang, so of course she will have a plan after her death. But when a person dies, politics dies, just like a lamp that goes out. Without her protection, and with Ben Wang's illegitimate son, Li Mibi is destined to die miserably. If Tuoba Bodhisattva wants to kill this king, unless this king fights him one-on-one. Otherwise, with his ability to lead troops, this king will definitely lose in a battle of 100,000 against 100,000. But above 200,000, he will definitely die. This king and Zhong Shentong are in secret collusion. Almost everyone in Beimang knows about this fact. As the ruler of a country, what can that old woman do to the Zhong family? The Zhong family was not like the Su family. They were ruffians who rebelled whenever they wanted. This is also the reason why he is willing to look at the Su family in Beiliang. The chess and sword music schools, Gong Luzi, was silent. The changes in the square in the palace were overwhelming. It was completely beyond the imagination of Queen Yu Ruru and Mao Gu. First, Minister Tang died in the hands of Su, even though he had a talisman array. Then, Second Minister Liang Zhong was extraordinarily powerful. He only used an ordinary iron spear to make the young king bleed. What happened next was even more confusing. After the third minister of offerings from southern border showed up, he did not rush to join hands with the second minister. He just casually took out a brocade pouch from his sleeve with his dark purple fingers. Then, he waved his sleeve and rolled up the peach blossoms that filled the sky, including the second minister. As a result, the 2 rows of peach trees under the palace wall became dead trees. At that time, Mao Bishan and Gu Feiqing knew that the essence of the talisman array was not the 2 aggressive talisman swords, but the inconspicuous poisonous peach blossoms. Mao Bishan had already fled. Gu Feiqing, who had always been loyal to the residents of Dragon King, did not care about etiquette. He held his breath and threw the queen outside. He risked his life to close the palace door, but just after a few steps, black blood flowed out of his chi orifice and he died. Southern Border had an immortal Gu that specialized in killing immortals. This immortal was naturally not an unfettered land immortal, but one of the 3 realms of first rank. However, it was similar to many moves in the pugilistic world that were powerful but could not withstand a single blow. Although the peach blossom immortal Gu of the third minister was not vulgar, it could not take the life of the demon. Instead, it was nailed to the palace wall by Zhong Liang. What was unimaginable was that the old man could actually let out a sinister laugh. He pressed his hands on the iron spear and pulled his body out of the spear inch by inch. After falling to the ground, his voice was hoarse. He sat down and said to the young man who had been watching by the side, "By the order of Master Li Yuanying, I respectfully welcome the king of Beiliang." Only then did he die with his eyes wide open. It was not the spear that took this death warrior's life, but the peach blossom immortal Gu itself. However, Zhong Liang was not unscathed. He used his fingers to wipe away the black blood that flowed from his ears to his temples. His life was not in danger, but his cultivation was still affected. Murong Baoding and Hong Jingyan left the palace at this time. Zhong Liang, who had a full beard, was silently healing his injuries. Su Fengyan squatted in front of the old death warrior of Beiliang and closed the old man's eyes. Su Fengyan had seen Murong Baoding's picture in the Tide Listening Pavilion secret files. After standing up, he heard this half-faced Buddha ask with a smile, "This king is accompanied by the 6th in the world, Gong Luzi. I wonder where Su Yanbing is?" Su Fengyan smiled and did not speak. Murong Baoding deliberately drew in a breath of cold air and asked meaningfully, "Did you really come to Qingcong City alone? Are you trying to use yourself as bait to catch a few big fish?" Su Fengyan said frankly, "Fishing is not fake, but it's my family's business. It can't be considered catching big fish. Su Yanbing is definitely here, but I don't know where this king is, and I don't know when he will appear." Murong Baoding looked at the calm young man under the wall and felt a heartfelt admiration. He somewhat understood why the current Zhao family son of heaven was in love with Chen Jibao. In the future, when he sat in the north facing the south and ruled the world, there would be such outstanding officials standing in the imperial court. Not to mention other things, Just watching them stand there and serve him was very pleasing to the eye. Murong Bao Ding laughed heartily and said, Su Fengnian, you may not know this, but this king's true eldest son is Yu Lu. This king can let bygones be bygones for your grievances with him. Su Fengnian took the crossing the river pawn from his waist and placed it in front of his eyes. He gently exhaled and purple thunderbolts rolled onto the scabbard, bouncing gently. There were 9 thunderbolts pearls on the blade. These were the treasures that he had obtained from his battle with Lu Haoshi. They could be considered priceless treasures. Su Fengnian looked at Murong Bao Ding and Hong Jingyan, who were standing side by side, and said something that even these 2 top experts could not understand. I have had Wang Xianji's mentality since 800 years ago. The whole world is my enemy. I am invincible in the world. Chapter 999. Murong Bao Ding glanced at the rolling thunder on the scabbard and was a little surprised. Although martial arts were vast and there were countless unorthodox methods, as long as it was related to Qi cultivators, it was considered top-notch. The young brother and sister behind him were more than familiar with this. In Beimang, there were Qi cultivators who were proficient in collecting thunder and lightning. The money grubber boy and the foodie girl gathered together and whispered to each other. Especially the gluttonous girl. She smacked her lips and stared fixedly at the 9 genuine purple sky thunder. She was very envious. As long as she swallowed them into her stomach and nourished them for a few years, she would definitely be able to beat this annoying fatty beside her into a pig's head. Hong Jingyan's expression was still rigid. When one's martial arts realm had reached such a high level, it was nothing more than coping with changes by sticking to the status quo. Su Fengnian's crossing the river pawn in his left hand was out of its scabbard in an instant. The speed of the blade was so fast that the scabbard that left his palm crashed into the palace wall. Su Fengnian's arm followed Wang Xiu's arc formula and swung the blade down. The 9 thunder lingered and the purple clouds dazzled. Zhong Liang unceremoniously controlled the iron spear that was abandoned by Su Fengnian. He had been holding the spear with one hand. This time, he finally held the spear with 2 hands and took out enough attention to deal with the unsheathed blade. The spear curved horizontally. Before the sharp blade of the blade touched it, the curved tip of the spear was already pointed at Su Fengnian's waist. Su Fengnian did not deliberately change from attacking to defending. He just followed the blade with ease as if he was possessed by God and understood the wonders of the Xian finger. The tip of the blade suddenly twisted and fell faster and faster. His body was also forcefully pulled a few feet forward. The rolling blade technique was still the rolling blade technique. It was just that compared to the rolling blade technique of ordinary swordsmen, it was much more mysterious. The spear missed for no reason. Zhong Liang's eyes lit up. Borrowing the force of the curved spear, the curved body of the spear also curved. In the eyes of others, one person was following the blade and the other person was unwilling to fall behind. Therefore, the person followed the spear. At first, Murong Bao Ding had a smile in his eyes. He did not think highly of the kid's rolling blade technique. However, when he saw that Su Fengnian's bladesmanship seemed to be disorderly, but it was just right. Every blade was chopped 4 feet away from Zhong Liang's face. This somewhat surprised half-faced Buddha. Zhong Liang, who kept dodging, frowned. He was not angry that this kid was taking revenge on him for pointing the tip of the spear at his glabella. It was because he had never heard of such a ridiculous rolling blade technique. Of course, Zhong Liang did not know that there was an old swordsman from East Yu named Song Yanqing. When he went out in Jianghu for the last time, he had 14 swords and 14 moves. The only sword with a sword tassel was called Zhao Dan, which meant that he was carrying a lamp to illuminate the mountains and rivers. It was such a walking sword that he walked all the way to the side of the white-robed Luo Yang. Every time Su Fengnian's rolling blade finger, a purple thunder was suspended. After 9 times, he suddenly clenched his right hand. There were 9 flying swords hidden in the 9 thunder, which condensed into a formation and trapped Zhong Liang. Su Fengnian did not look at how the breeding demon was going to deal with it. He randomly patted the void with one hand, which was the 18 strokes of the Hu Jia played by the blind female zither player in the battle in the Rainy Alley. His finger tapped on the soldiers crossing the river, which was the finger sword secret skill of the young female Qi trainer on the lake of Yuyan Mountain Villa. Many of the abandoned talisman swords that were left behind in the square jumped up from the ground and stabbed fiercely at Zhong Liang with distorted trajectories. Together with the domineering Thunderpool flying sword and the unpredictable Hu Jia paddle, it created a magnificent scene. The 3 arcs of the arc formula formed momentum. At this time, Su Fengnian's 3 arcs, were secretly learned from Song Yanqing, Xueqi, and the Qi trainer from the South Sea. They seemed to be unrelated, but they were fused together and vaguely appeared to be in the great Grandmaster realm. Murong Baoding chuckled softly. It looks good and is quite practical, but it's a bit too messy. There's still a long way to go before returning to the original state of celestial phenomenon. Zhongliang was exhausted dealing with the 3 arcs in the formation. It was easy to deal with the barbarian clapper that came out of nowhere. With his Vajra physique, even if he was hit by it, it would be nothing more than a flesh wound. It was just a small matter of losing face. He didn't know how the boy controlled the dozens of talisman swords, but it didn't matter. With Zhongliang's Shen finger comprehension, he could deal with it easily. In the past, with his rare talent, he didn't even need to dodge. However, he was afraid that if he didn't dodge, he would fall into a trap. Moreover, the flying swords of the sword tomb, which were wrapped in purple thunder as clothes, were no longer close to him, a natural sword embryo. Each of the 9 kinds of sword chi had its own killing intent, which was the real trump card. The iron spear that Zhongliang held with both hands had its spearhead cut off by the purple thunder. From the moment the guy unsheathed the saber in his left hand until now, Zhongliang hadn't been able to fight back even once. This made the second young master of the Beimang family, who ranked relatively low among the top 10 devils but had outstanding strength, really angry. Beimang was at the top of the martial arts world, and the number of times they fought each other was far more than Liang. They never liked the martial arts fights that didn't hurt each other's feelings. If old monster Wang from the martial emperor city didn't go to Liang Jianghu to be a whetstone, the number of people in the martial arts ranking list might not even be equal to the number of people in Beimang. In Beimang, heroes didn't matter where they came from. Many people were nameless one day, and the next day, they became the distinguished guests of the general. Zhongliang didn't rely on his identity as Zhong Shentong's younger brother to stand out in Beimang's Jianghu. He relied on being hunted and being hunted again and again. When he was young, he provoked the Dragon King, who was also one of the top 10 devils, and was hunted for nearly a month. It was because of that escape that made Zhongliang finally become a level 1 master. The reason why Zhongliang deliberately showed mercy before was not only because he wanted to humiliate the young king, but also because he couldn't stand the kid's attitude of not taking out his saber when he practiced. How dare he put on airs in front of Zhongliang? Only now did he know that the young king of Beiliang had learned a variety of skills and was not inferior to him at all. After he took out his saber, his momentum was even more imposing. Zhongliang had to restrain his contempt and treat him as an opponent that he could fight with all his strength. Zhongliang certainly knew that the young man standing 5 feet away from him had many tricks up his sleeves. Other than the thunder-wrapped flying sword, he must have a more powerful trump card. Zhongliang guessed that it must be the second saber on the right side of his waist. Zhongliang had heard that Su Fengnian, who was once a disciple of Li Chungang, used the mind cultivation technique to cultivate his saber. On the grassland, he used his saber to kill the colorful python demon beside Tuoba Chun's son. Zhongliang dealt with the talisman swords that were undulating with the rhythm of Su Fengnian's rhythm. Of course, there was the more troublesome purple thunder sword formation. When Su Fengnian made a move, Zhongliang countered it. It seemed complicated and long, but in fact, it only took a few blinks of an eye for the talisman swords to be broken and fell to the ground. Zhongliang's iron spear had also been cut by more than half, and the spear had become a long saber. Fortunately, Zhongliang's talent was so high that no matter what he learned, he could easily go further than many famous experts who studied for their entire lives. The broken spear in his hand knocked against the purple thunder flying sword. The sound was loud and clear, like the sound of a 1,000-pound bell. It could be heard clearly outside the residence of Dragon King. Every time the spear knocked against the sword, Zhongliang's perception of each thunder-flying sword increased. When the expressionless young man holding the saber finally moved his right hand, Zhongliang's pupils shrank. He knew that the saber in his right hand was about to be unsheathed. The outsiders, Murong Baoding and Hong Jingyan, sighed softly almost at the same time. Su Fengnian was indeed holding the hilt of Xiaodong's saber in his right hand. However, the one who made the move was not Xiaodong, but the scabbard crossing the river pawn. Su Fengnian's palm was split open, and blood splattered everywhere. It was obvious that the crossing the river pawn was so fast that even Su Fengnian, who was holding the saber, could not control it. Outside the Shenwu city, a person who was far away in the martial emperor city borrowed a sword. Su Fengnian decisively gave him the sword. At the last moment of life and death, He killed Han Xianxia, the cat that was known as the land immortal, Han Wudi. Chapter 1000. This time, Su Fengnian returned the sword to the old man surnamed Sui. This time, he returned the scabbard to the soldier who had crossed the river. Otherwise, with Su Fengnian's spiritual foundation, he would have been able to cultivate the one-sleeve azure dragon. He would not have only used the rolling knife technique, which was born from Song Nianqing's shining guts sword technique, to fight against Zhong Liang. Everything was just an extremely sinister smoke screen to pave the way for returning the sword. In the soul-stirring trap outside the Shenwu city, the famous sword Spring and Autumn was only a foot away from the human cat's heart. The further the person who borrowed the sword was, the more powerful it would be. However, Zhong Liang was not the mysterious celestial phenomenon of Death Han Xianxia. This time, when the sword returned to the scabbard, it still directly penetrated the chest of this Beimang demon. It was just that he did not die on the spot. The third consecrator pulled out the iron spear with his body forward. Zhong Liang directly passed through the scabbard of the soldier who had crossed the river and crashed into the palace wall to escape. Su Fengnian did not chase after him. He only looked at the dead Beiliang spy sitting on the ground. It could be considered that he had avenged the old man's hatred for the spear. Murong Baoding said regretfully, with Zhong Liang's ability, he should have fought with all his strength from the beginning. How could he be in such a difficult situation? His talent is really high. Before Luo Yang, he was the fastest person in Beimang to enter the Finger Mysterious Realm from the Vajra realm. He was even faster than Li Chungang from Liyang. This is a great thing but also a great thing. The Vajra realm is naturally not as invulnerable as other martial artists who have been stuck in this realm for many years. Zhong Liang was lucky that as the immortal sword embryo, he was able to sense the danger before the scabbard blade from the sword Wei pierced his heart. This was why he was able to avoid the fate of being stabbed to the heart. Unfortunately, he was lucky enough to avoid this blade. However, he could not avoid Su Yanbing who came with the instant spear. Hong Jingyan hesitated and was about to step forward. Murong Baoding laughed softly. Have you thought it through? Do I really have to save Zhong Liang from Su Yanbing's hands so that I can express my goodwill to this king's sister? Don't regret it. Hong Jingyan asked in return, if Hong Jingyan could hide the secret of the military edict from His Majesty, why couldn't the military edict wait for Hong Jingyan's plan before acting? Murong Baoding didn't say anything and just shook his head. The two of them parted ways. As soon as Hong Jingyan left the palace, Murong Baoding muttered to himself, if I don't dare to gamble, how can I take it? Murong Baoding raised his voice and said to Su Fengnian with a smile, this is Gung Lozi. Don't be fooled by his high cultivation level. In this king's eyes, he is far inferior to you. Just now, this king even promised to divide the king of the north and south courtyards with you. Now, it seems like he is really humiliating you, Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian took a deep breath and absorbed the 9 purple thunder. He then controlled his qi to take back the soldier of crossing the river that was still in its sheath. He shook it casually and shook off the blood of Zhong Liang on the sheath. He asked with a smile, if you were to face this blade, what would the result be? There was no tense atmosphere between the two of them. Murong Baoding sat lazily on the steps and laughed. This king can predict that blade, but he probably won't be able to dodge it. However, even if your blade hits this king's chest, you won't be able to pierce it. It's not that this king is looking down on you. In fact, only Wang Xianji and Tuoba Bodhisattva can do it with their bare hands. Dong Tai's sword can also do it. As for the others, the difficulty is not small. Oh right, there's also Li Xiaoxin with the King Kong glare. So even if Hong Jingyan went crazy and turned around to kill this king won't take it seriously. He will just leisurely run back to Beimang. Who knows, he might even be able to chat with you guys. The martial arts evaluation released by Beimang asserted that as long as Wang Xianji was willing to join forces with Tuoba Bodhisattva, they could kill all 8 people behind them. No matter how much the world discussed, there was no way to know what these 8 people were thinking. At this time, there were 2 people in the residence of Dragon King. One was the 6th in the world while the other was the 8th. They had a drink and chat on their journey to the south. Hong Jingyan, who stood at a higher position, admitted this, but Murong Baoding denied it. However, the reason why he denied it was not because he was conceited about his cultivation, but because he felt that Dong Tai, who was going to visit Immortals after borrowing the sword, would have a chance to surpass Tuoba Bodhisattva's realm and be on equal footing with Wang Xianji. Su Fengnian asked, Even Su Yambing's instant spear can't do it? Murong Baoding thought about it seriously and said, "Firstly, this king's true strength is unknown. Secondly, if he says that he can't do it, you will only think that he is bragging." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "If Su Yambing doesn't want to fight with you, there will naturally be someone else who will." Murong Baoding said in a low voice, "No room for discussion? Do we have to fight and kill?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "When Su Xiao was alive, he was too lazy to pay attention to you guys. In this life, I will not do business with Bei Mang." Murong Baoding stood up with a face full of regret. He stretched and said, "It turns out that you are much more stupid than this king thought." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I'll return the same words to you." The spy leader of Qing Tsang was actually a pawn planted by Bei Mang. After lying to Zhou Junchen about the military situation, he had already disappeared. He said that Su Fengnian had entered the land of refugees alone and that Beiliang did not have a large army. In fact, he was only half right. Other than the young king of Beiliang, who was supposed to be the son of a rich family, there was also a mighty cavalry of 1,000 men. However, there were less than 100 men in armor. The remaining 800 to 900 men were wearing kasayas. Their bald heads were very eye-catching. It was actually a scene of a large group of monks heading west. There was only one carriage. Nearby, there was a huge black tiger running around. From time to time, it would stop and turn its head, waiting for the carriage. The cavalry on both sides were all heavily armored. Even the ignorant and inexperienced people in the land of refugees could tell at a glance that this was the Longxiang army that had destroyed 3 important towns of Beimang last year. They were the elites of Beiliang's elite cavalry. It was the 30,000 dragon elephant cavalry that had trampled half of Gusai state into pieces. Who in the southern court was not afraid of the black-clothed youth's invincibility? Beiliang had always been close to Buddhism, especially after the Liang imperial court destroyed Buddhism. Countless monks and monks fled to Beiliang Taoism, which seemed to be the only worry-free pure land left in the world. Then, the new king of Beiliang suddenly ordered all the monks in Liangzhou to enter the land of refugees to preach Buddhism. He also promised that there would be armored cavalry to protect them. Most of the foreign monks were afraid that they had just left the wolf's den and entered the tiger's den. For a while, they took a wait-and-see attitude. Fortunately, the king of Beiliang did not make things difficult for them. He only ordered the 600 local monks in Liangzhou to gather and head west, without any resistance. However, there were more than 300 foreign monks who still had the idea that if they did not go to hell, they would die. In addition to Liangzhou, there were also monks from Yuling and Liangzhou who set off quickly. Many monks who chose to give up the risk regretted when they learned that the Black Tiger, who had listened to the great immortal Qi Xuanzhen's scripture, was also in the cavalry. Many monks who were familiar with the ways of the world wanted to mend the pen after the sheep were lost. They tried to secretly follow the cavalry, but they were mercilessly driven back to Liangzhou by the border cavalry. After the Beimang spy Taoist Qing Huai, who had been dormant in Qingrong Temple for many years, was killed by Beiliang's falcons, monk Huang Deng, who was a famous monk in Gangnam-do, witnessed the death of the old Taoist with his own eyes. The old monk Huang Deng became the new abbot of Qingrong Temple. This time, the new king of Liang ordered the monks to go west to the land of refugees. The old monk Huang Deng was the first monk to take the initiative to go to Liangzhou, and he was also the most famous one among them. Therefore, monk Huang Deng was specially allowed to ride in the carriage by Beiliang, which was a great honor. However, the old monk Huang Deng seemed to be a little restless along the way. He was not an old monk who bowed in front of the powerful. Monk Huang Deng was known for his teachings in Gangnam-do. Even when facing the honorable provincial governor, he was treated the same as a peddler. The reason why the old monk Huang Deng was uncomfortable was that the younger brother of the new king of Liang was sitting in the carriage. It was Su Longxiang, who had massacred the city and killed the surrendered soldiers at the border last year. If that was all, the monk would not be so restrained. The main reason was that this prince was not barefoot and dressed in black like before. Instead, he was wrapped in an extremely strange bright red armor, revealing only his eyes. The carriage was filled with murderous intent. Monk Huang Deng, who was known for his Buddhist aura, was pitiful. Some distance away from Qingcang City, a falcon was hovering at a low altitude. Hearing the sound, the talisman armor suddenly stood up and left the carriage. The young man in armor began to run wildly. Before the red armor entered the residence of Dragon King, which was located at the westernmost position, It had smashed the entire Qingcong city in a straight line. The Great Vajra Realm against the Great Vajra Realm. Chapter 1001. As soon as Zhong Liang broke through the wall, someone immediately broke through the wall and came over. Moreover, this guy was dressed in bright red. The key point was that he looked like a very valuable family property. This made the money-grubbing young man widen his eyes in envy. He felt that if he had this outfit, he would be very impressive. The foodie girl, who was more talented than her brother, was no exception. She hid behind Murong Baoding and stuck her head out, staring intently. At this time, Murong Baoding's heart was more ridiculous than angry. Did this Su guy just use an armor to send him away? He had heard that there was a talisman general armor among the 4 grandmasters of Liyang. He was a good-for-nothing who had been skinned alive. Murong Baoding had always been prejudiced against these so-called masters who used external objects to abuse their power. He looked at Su Fengnian with a gloomy face and said, "This king has already been rejected by Hong Jingyan once. This king's patience is running out. Su Fengnian, I advise you not to take advantage of him. Be careful that you don't become the second Zhou Junchen." Su Fengnian seemed to be in a good mood. He walked to the side of the red armor and patted it here and there. He seemed to be relieved. He turned his head and smiled at half-faced Buddha. "Murong Baoding, don't think too highly of yourself. Who are you trying to scare by calling him this king? This is not Orange Province, and you haven't become the Emperor of Beimang. As for me, thanks to my father, I've seen the Emperor of Liyang, the Empress of Beimang, and the vassal kings of Liyang. I've also seen many of the top 10 people in the world who are better than you in the martial arts evaluation. They don't seem to be as arrogant as you. Therefore, you should speak as arrogantly as you can." Murong Baoding put on a fake smile and twitched his lips, revealing a strong murderous intent. Talisman General Su Longxiang looked at his brother. The latter nodded, indicating that he should play freely. Since One Cut Willow was Murong Baoding's illegitimate son, he should treat it as the father paying the son's debt. Su Longxiang turned to face Murong Baoding. He didn't know if it was because of the talisman armor's tight concealment or if it was just a bluff, but Murong Baoding didn't feel any abundant chi flow. This made the governor, who had high vision, very puzzled. Where did Su Fengnian come up with such a joke? Wasn't he afraid of disgrace? Murong Baoding only knew that Su Zhao's youngest son was born with a vajra. He was barefoot and dressed in black. He led the cavalry of Dragon and Elephant and bullied the 3 military towns of Gentleman's Hall. They were like 3 virgins who had no power to fight back. His son's exquisite murderous sword chi couldn't kill him. Naturally, the governor of Orange Province didn't expect that Su Fengnian would make an unnecessary move and let his younger brother wear the talisman general red armor. Su Longxiang's 5 fingers stretched and clenched into a fist. His body moved and he instantly punched Murong Baoding's chest. The chi flow was vast and mighty, and the square shook. Although Murong Baoding's body only swayed slightly and seemed to be motionless, the invisible mirror between Su Longxiang and the governor rippled violently. The 2 palace walls on the edge of the mirror were torn apart, and the peach trees near the foot of the wall were crushed into powder in an instant. Murong Baoding stretched out his hand and rubbed Murong Caiyang's head behind him. The girl knew the severity of the situation and immediately retreated to the throne room with Yelu Kai-in. After Su Longxiang punched, his body swept back and returned to his original position. He crossed his arms over his chest. This posture clearly showed that he wanted Murong Baoding to punch him back. He didn't dodge. Murong Baoding said, "Oh, so it's Huang Manor from the Su family who was born with divine strength. No wonder, no wonder." Su Fengnian gently slapped Huang Manor's head and laughed angrily. "He's the 8th most powerful person in the world, Murong half-faced Buddha. Why are you being so polite with him? 1 punch each. Treat it as playing house and beat him up with all your might. This guy's ranking isn't high among the 10, but his ability to take a beating is outstanding. His killing power isn't good, and he's much worse than Dong Tai and Han Shengxian. If it were any other of the 10 most powerful people in the world, I wouldn't be at ease. But since it's Murong Baoding, it doesn't matter. Brother can verify if there are any flaws in the talisman armor that the Mo family's great son carefully crafted." Su Fengnian looked at Huang Man'er's eyes and glared, "You're not allowed to take off your armor." Murong Baoding walked down the steps and mocked himself. "You 2 brothers really don't take this king seriously." Su Fengnian covered his hands with his sleeves and hid far away at the foot of the wall. He squatted beside the old consecrator's corpse. Murong Baoding didn't finish walking down the steps. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and casually pushed Su Longxiang's head, which was covered with the talisman armor. Su Longxiang was sent flying. Not only did he smash through the palace gate, there was also a deafening shattering sound coming from the other side of the city gate. Murong Baoding's body was suspended in the air for a moment before he floated down like a feather landing on the ground. This light feather actually crushed the solid bricks. Murong Baoding had just landed when a scarlet rainbow returned. This time, it was Murong Baoding's turn to fly back dozens of feet. In the blink of an eye, Murong Baoding took a step forward and punched out with his left fist. Su Longxiang's right fist collided with his. The astral chi rushed over, and Su Fengnian had no choice but to extend his arm in front of the old spy, Bailiang, to protect him. Then, the two great Vajra realm martial artists fought with their left and right fists respectively. They were like two barbaric bulls wrestling. They didn't have the demeanor of an expert, but their aura was extraordinarily powerful. Murong Baoding roared angrily. His entire face was glowing with golden light. He pushed Su Longxiang a few feet away and kicked him. His expression couldn't be seen clearly. Su Longxiang bent down and wrapped his hands around the leg of the half-faced Buddha. He twisted his waist and forcefully pulled Murong Baoding out of the ground like a radish. He spun one round and threw it out, smashing half of the palace wall. Su Longxiang leaped up and stomped on Murong Baoding's head. The latter slapped with one hand, and his body was like a tornado. He whipped his leg and smashed Su Longxiang into the palace wall on Su Fengnian's side. Just like that, the two palace walls were destroyed in half. Su Longxiang stood up from the dust and slapped his palm on the chest of the talisman armor. His chi flowed in layers and dispelled the accumulated dust on the talisman armor. The red armor was still bright and didn't have any flaws. Su Fengnian grinned happily. For the past half a year, the group of old men in the machinery bureau was only one step away from being forced to hang themselves by him. Even the two great masters of MO, who used to be easy to talk to, didn't give him any face. Later on, whenever they heard that he had come to the machinery bureau, they would simply use the lame excuse of seclusion to hide. Otherwise, they would say that they were old and their backs were sore and their legs were cramping. Su Fengnian just had to shamelessly argue with these old men to see who was more shameless. Fortunately, this talisman armor, which involved materials, Taoist talismans, Buddhist incantations, and other vast problems, was finally completed on time. In fact, later on, the old men were addicted to studying it. When Su Fengnian said that he wanted to take it out for a walk, the two great masters of Mo looked at him with resentment as if he had stolen their wives. They even threatened to fight the king of Bailiang to the death if it was damaged in the slightest. Fortunately, Su Fengnian threw out a huge bait. He said that no matter how much manpower, material, and financial resources Bailiang had to build the talisman armor to the level where it could withstand heavenly thunder. He even provoked them by asking if they dared to go against heaven's will. This made the eyes of a large group of old men immediately light up. They turned around and ran to draw the blueprint. They really ran, the kind where they ran away like a wisp of smoke. Su Fengnian looked up and saw that the throne room was still fine. The palace walls had already disappeared, but Huang Manor had somehow wrapped his hands around Murong Baoding's head and tucked it under his armpit. The two of them bumped into each other like this. After they bumped into the palace walls, they went to find trouble with the palace walls. Su Fengnian returned the favor. After he broke free, he grabbed Huang Manor's ankle and used the talisman armor as a knife to cut rice paper, cutting a gully in the middle of the palace walls. Huang Manor did not fall behind. He stepped on Murong Baoding's chest in the air and kicked the half-faced Buddha, who was known as the immovable wisdom king, to stagger. Then, the two of them began to fight back and forth, punching each other's heads. After each punch, the talisman armor and the half-faced Buddha were unharmed, but the ground under their feet cracked inch by inch. Huang Manor was still fine. He had the talisman armor on him, so he did not appear to be in a difficult situation. However, Murong Baoding's clothes were already in rags and he looked like an old beggar. He did not have the slightest bit of the bearing of a Beimang military commander. Chapter 1002. Murong Baoding casually picked up an iron spear from the square and smashed it into the talisman armor's waist. The talisman armor was fine, but the iron spear shattered from head to tail. There were still many iron spears on the ground, but they were all picked up by Murong Baoding. During this time, two iron spears were aimed at Huang Manor's eyes, but they didn't succeed. The iron spears that were supposed to shatter were also shattered. Without the palace walls blocking his view, Su Fengnian's line of sight was still quite wide. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but tremble with fear. He had intentionally looked down on Murong Baoding, who was the 8th most powerful person in the world. However, the half-faced Buddha's methods weren't as powerful as the other 9 people's. However, that was only when compared to Wang Xianji, Tuoba Bodhisattva, and Deng Tai Yi. It didn't mean that Murong Baoding was a coward who only knew how to take a beating. The half-faced Buddha's punches and kicks weren't as powerful as Huang Maner's. If it were an ordinary martial artist in the Vajra realm, they would have been beaten to a pulp. Su Fengnian could see that the ingenuity of the half-faced Buddha's attack was that after a punch, there would still be a lingering effect on the opponent's body. The essence of willow sword qi was able to grow a willow. It was most likely born from this. Therefore, after more than 100 punches from Murong Baoding, how heavy would the qi accumulated on Huang Maner's talisman armor be? Therefore, when Huang Maner was pushed to the wall by Murong Baoding, before the talisman armor could touch the wall, a huge hole was blasted in the wall by the red armor's crazy qi. Murong Baoding looked at the red armor who stood up from the collapsed ruins and let out a long sigh. Their clan had the custom of worshipping Buddha. When Murong Baoding was young, he liked to follow his elders to the temples to worship Buddha. Moreover, he would often raise his head to look at those gilded Buddhas, and he would often look at them for several hours. As he grew older, especially after the Murong Empress usurped the throne, the Murong clan became extremely honored. Murong Baoding did not neglect to focus on practicing martial arts and learning the art of war. Whenever he had free time, he would travel and visit famous temples to look at Buddha. This had practically become a strange hobby that everyone in the northern Mang and northern dynasties knew about. During the war between the two countries, Murong Baoding was good at raiding and killing the enemy with a small number of elite cavalry. He became famous early on, but he was much slower in martial arts. After the defeat, Murong Baoding went on a long trip alone and saw a big Buddha enlightened him. He learned the Vajra invincible sitting Buddha. After he opened acupoints, he opened and opened Buddha. And he opened Buddha's Vajra's body. Standing. Murong Baoding slowly raised his left palm in front of his chest. His right hand was about to press against his chest like a monk. Standing Buddha between heaven and earth. Su Longxiang turned his head and looked at Su Fengnian who was squatting in the distance. He took off the rune armor helmet with both hands and threw it at his feet. He wanted to follow the method that his brother had asked him to memorize. He wanted to knock on a few points of the array and take off the red armor in one go. However, Su Longxiang hesitated and only took off the helmet. He did not take off the armor completely. Su Fengnian saw this and sighed. He did not say anything. Su Longxiang was much taller than when he went to Mount Longhu to cultivate with the old celestial master Zhao Shituan. His face was sallow and emaciated, but the biggest change was that his eyes were less confused and more stubborn. It was this young man who slaughtered the soldiers of the 3 towns of Beimang. He personally led the cruel act of killing the surrendered soldiers after the spring and autumn period. Su Longxiang twisted his neck and punched the palm of his left hand with his right fist. Then, he bent his knees slightly. Su Longxiang looked at the half-faced Buddha whose body was overflowing with golden light. The corner of his mouth twitched. With Su Longxiang as the center, not only did the fist power that Murong Baoding left on the rune armor suddenly disappear, the atmosphere between heaven and earth seemed to be absorbed by the young man. The young man was like an ancient ferocious beast. If God blocked him, he would kill God. If Buddha blocked him, he would kill Buddha. Su Longxiang began to run. Step by step. He stepped on the ground with the momentum of 1,000 horses galloping thunder. Then, he jumped up lightly. His 10 fingers intertwined and formed a fist, smashing down on the head of the standing Buddha. When Murong Baoding's invincible golden body was smashed into the ground, his hands were tightly pressed together and there was a gap. Su Fengnian stood up. He knew that the situation in Qingcang City was settled. Su Fengnian did not stop the young man and woman from leaving quietly. Although Murong Baoding's body was broken by Huang Maner's fist, if both sides were to fight to the death, Su Fengnian might not be able to gain anything. Su Fengnian looked at Huang Maner's back. He probably felt that if he took off the rune armor helmet, he would be scolded by his older brother. He looked into the pit for a long time. When Su Fengnian did not appear, he ran to squat down and put on the helmet. He always had his back to Su Fengnian and just squatted like that. Su Fengnian did not know whether to laugh or cry. He just lightly carried the old spy's corpse and walked into the very small throne room. Dressed in a dragon robe, Zhou Junchen bent down hard and called out to the king of Bailiang. He said a lot of mushy and flattering words. Su Fengnian placed the old man's corpse beside the dragon pillar. He did not say anything and just glanced at Zhou Junchen. The latter quickly shut up. He realized that the young vassal king in front of him who had seen many storms was not like the previous vassals he had relied on. Not only was his eyes shallow, but he was also soft-hearted. Zhou Junchen lamented in his heart. Half an hour ago, he was still waiting for his subordinates to tie this guy up and bring him to the throne room. He hoped that he could enjoy an audience with the dignified king of Liang. Now, the battle outside had turned the world upside down. Not only had the Ruren Mountain Lord, Hong Jingyan, even Murong Baoding had to personally lead the battle. Thinking of this, Zhou Junchen bent down even more. Su Fengnian went straight to the point and said, "Originally, I wanted to rely on my status as the Northern Liang Prince to talk business with you while drinking. However, as the Azure City Lord, you really put on airs. All right, we can settle the old and new debts together. Yuan Shandong is from Northern Liang, and so is your third consecrator. They all died because of you, Zhou Junchen. Your head isn't worth much, so you can't pay for it. When I came in, I estimated that you would have to use 20,000 loyal refugees to pay for it. Jiang Heng and He Dajia have about 3,000 bodyguards. Shan Konggu, who is not in the city, has another 1,600. In addition, there are more than 1,000 dragon scale guards from the residence of the Dragon King. These are not included in the 20,000 people. Just take it as a gift for our first meeting." Zhou Junchen cried and wailed, "Your Highness, I don't have the ability to turn beans into soldiers. Winning over 20,000 refugees is harder than ascending to the heavens, let alone making them loyal. It's not that I don't want to do my best for your Highness, but I really don't have the strength to do it." Su Fengnian suddenly grabbed Zhou Junchen's neck with one hand and threw him onto a pillar. Zhou Junchen's feet were off the ground, and his back was against the pillar. He could not breathe. Su Fengnian's arm was wrapped with the red snake. He sneered and said, "Then you can die. It seems that after your head is cut off, it will be more useful to use it to intimidate the Qingtsong refugees than to keep it on my shoulder." Zhou Junchen tried his best to grab Su Fengnian's arm with both hands, making a final struggle. He had only heard that this young man, who was still His Royal Highness last year, was undisciplined and lawless. He did not know that he was so unwilling to drag things out and would take someone's life without a word. Zhou Junchen was smart, so he knew to wait for a good price to sell himself at a fair price. He did not want to sell himself too cheaply to Bailiang. It seemed that the king of Bailiang did not like smart people. If he had known this earlier, even if Zhou Junchen had the courage of a bear and the courage of a leopard, he would not have dared to hide his shrewdness. Su Fengnian reached out and pulled out the crossing the river pawn. He tilted the blade and gently pressed the tip of the blade against Zhou Junchen's forehead. He smiled and said, "If I stab the blade into your skull, I will probably be able to nail you to the pillar. Emperor, I have always wanted to kill you, so it's not a bad idea to try it out on you first." After an unknown amount of time, Zhou Junchen slowly regained consciousness and opened his eyes with difficulty. He was in a trance and his vision was blurry. Could it be that he had arrived in the netherworld? Or was he still walking on the road to the Yellow Springs and had not crossed the bridge of helplessness? Zhou Junchen subconsciously touched his forehead. It seemed that there was no wound left behind. Zhou Junchen wanted to curse that person surnamed Su for being vicious and merciless, but his throat felt as uncomfortable as if a piece of burning coal had been stuffed into it. He reached out and touched his forehead. It hurt so much that his body trembled and he broke out in a cold sweat. He suddenly opened his eyes wide and raised his head. He saw a snow-white hemp robe and a young face that made Zhou Junchen fear to the bone. Su Fengnian looked down at the local emperor, who was sitting limply on the ground. The corners of his mouth twitched. "Zhou Junchen, you owe me another life. Tell me, how many refugees do you want to pay off your debt now?" Zhou Junchen, who knew that he had escaped death, had learned his lesson. He hugged the king of Bailiang's leg and cried out in a hoarse voice, "Your Highness, if you say tens of thousands, it will be tens of thousands. This humble one will listen to your Highness. If this humble one dares to say no, your Highness will reward this humble one with a knife. Your Highness, you don't even have to lift a finger. Su Fengnian kicked Zhou Junchen aside and walked out of the hall. Huang Man was still squatting there. The short youth was dressed in red armor and looked like a tall building. There was a red building between Bai Liang and Bai Mang. If he wanted to kill Prince Liang, he had to pass through this building first. Chapter 1003. Su Yanbing had not returned yet, so they still had to eat. Zhou Junchen, who had just escaped death, did not dare to flaunt his wealth with lavish fish and meat. He had the imperial kitchen carefully prepare a vegetarian feast. Queen Yu Ruru accompanied him from the side, in charge of holding a bottle of rice wine. Zhou Junchen had tactfully taken off his dragon robe and changed into the brocade robe of an ordinary wealthy family. Naturally, Yu Ruru followed her husband. Although she did not wear the phoenix coronet and robe, she still put some effort into it. She wore a yellow crown made of green and red velvet. It was inlaid with pearls and inlaid with jade, and it was a foot high. It was like a straight-neck goose head, making her slender white neck even more attractive. Huang Manor wolfed down the food and took a general with real power from Qingcang City to arrange for the monks to stay in the west. Zhou Junchen carefully glanced at the king of Bailiang, who was chewing slowly, and made up his mind to accompany him to eat, drink, and smile. As for sleeping with him, he was a man, but he was powerless. That was the skill of the queen of Qingcang City. Su Fengnian ignored Yu Ruru's flirtatious glances and asked Zhou Junchen to tell him about the situation of the two kings of Bailiang. The spies of Bailiang were not immortals. They could not be meticulous in all aspects. Zhou Junchen was one of the 4 leaders in the land of refugees. The news from his mouth was not low. Mal Yoka, the king of Phoenix Soaring, was once an unknown metalworker in Yangzhou. The way he made his fortune was somewhat similar to Zhou Junchen's. Both of them first worked for other powerful forces, but they were nothing more than advisors. Later, his old master died in an assassination attempt. The nominal king of Phoenix Soaring was young and ignorant, so Mal Yoka was able to control the emperor and command his vassals. Little by little, he accumulated a substantial amount of wealth. However, Zhou Junchen said that this person had some fateful encounters with Mount Lantua in the western region. Since last year, he had been sheltering hundreds of monk soldiers. According to Northern Liang spies, the prince of Linyao, Kai Anshan, who came from an aristocratic family in northern Liang, was harsh and merciless. He was a person who shared weal and woe but could not share riches and honor with others. However, in Zhou Junchen's mouth, Kai Anshan was actually described as a rather heroic old man. Su Fengnian felt that Kai Anshan most likely had some ability to convince the vile Zhou Junchen wholeheartedly. As for the gang between Linyao and Fengxiang, they were all horse bandits who relied on plundering for a living. They turned their backs on each other and were experts in taking advantage of each other. Over the years, the 3 military towns had suffered quite a bit. Moreover, this group of horse bandits were often bold enough to cross the border and plunder from Northern Mang's southern court. Once, one of Northern Mang's great generals, Lu Guai, was alarmed. Not only did he personally lead an army to suppress the bandits, he also specially instructed a fatty surnamed Dong to keep an eye on this area. It was only after this incident that the horse bandits at the border of Gusai province were reduced by a lot. This lawless gang was stationed at Stone Mountain. Zhou Junchen said that the gang leader was a coquettish woman in the prime of her youth. He revealed the heavenly secret and reminded Su Fengnian that although this group of horse bandits was not on good terms with Northern Mang, both he and Kai Anshan privately felt that it was merely a ruse to injure themselves to gain the enemy's confidence. In reality, they were spies that Northern Mang had planted in the refugee lands. Su Fengnian sorted out Zhou Junchen's words bit by bit and did not find any big loopholes. He asked, "The 3 old military towns and the horse bandits have a total of 170,000 to 180,000 sinners. About half of them are in the prime of their lives. They can fight on horseback and farm off horseback. They are a source of soldiers that even Bai Mang covets. I don't expect to get all of them in one go. You see, Fengxiang, Linyao and Stone Mountain, there are only about 20 people in power in these 3 places. How many of them are willing to be appeased and recruited?" Zhou Junchen hesitated for a moment. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'll risk my life to tell you the truth. As long as they don't really starve to death, they would rather be hungry than eat the leftovers given by the Bailiang. Take my Qingcang City as an example. It's easy to guess that Shan Kongwu and his 1,600 people would take advantage of this opportunity to either establish their own family or to rely on Kai Anshan in Linyao City. They would rather die than run back to Qingcang City. No matter how high the position you give him, it's useless. When he was 6 years old, he saw with his own eyes that the heads of his family's elders were chopped off one by one. Then, he was driven to this desolate land of refugees. Even in his dreams, he was thinking about how to kill his way back to Beiliang for revenge. Fengxiang and Linyao also have many people in their prime who are irreconcilable with the Beiliang. They hold military power. Firstly, I'm not from the Beiliang noble family that was destroyed back then. I have no grudge against the Beiliang. Secondly, I admire the ability of the prince from the bottom of my heart. That's why I'm willing to do anything for the Beiliang. Su Fengnian put down his chopsticks and said calmly, "If you were in my position, how would you recruit the refugees? No matter how difficult it is, you still have to do it. If you can tell me the truth, I'll give you a great merit, and the Qingcong Empire will still be in your pocket." Zhou Junchen was about to pretend to be trembling in fear when Yu Ruru, who was holding the bottle, coughed lightly. Zhou Junchen quickly came back to his senses. He already knew the habits of this young king when he talked to you about serious matters. Don't be vague, it was better to be straightforward than anything else. Zhou Junchen drank a cup of wine to boost his courage. Then he said, "We refugees are all ghosts without a home or roots. Yes, we're the kind of pitiful people who don't even know where to go during the Qingming festival. We all believe that if we don't stay here, there will be a place to stay. We don't do long-term business here, and no one has the patience to cast a long line to catch a big fish. We only care about what you can take out from your pocket. If you give us money and food, then we'll be your people from head to toe. If you reward us with good wine and good meat every day, then I'll be willing to risk my life for you." Of course, Beiliang, this outsider, is an exception. We've suffered too much for so many years. The crossbowmen of the prince's family come here to kill people every 2 or 3 days. We're scared and scared to the bone. I heard that His Highness had brought more than 1,000 monks into the land of the refugees. This is something that this lowly one could never come up with even if I racked my brains. It's amazing. There aren't many ancient books in the entire land of the refugees. Therefore, Confucianism is a joke here. As for Taoism, when a person attains the Tao, even his chickens and dogs ascend to the heavens, no one is interested in it. If one can't even fill their stomachs, how can they cultivate? Only the bald donkey's theory is something that many people are willing to believe. In any case, they were born with a lowly life of suffering. At most they would just give up. What's the big deal? Can't they just wait for the next life? I've seen through people. As long as they have the slightest desire to stay, they will start to fear death. Take me, Zhou Junchen, for example. When this lowly one heard that His Highness wanted to keep me alive in Qingcong, I couldn't help but become excited. Once the monks arrived, they would pray for blessings for the refugees day after day. Although the refugees might not be grateful, at least they would have something to think about and wouldn't give up so easily. They wouldn't think that killing one Beiliang soldier in this lifetime would be considered as breaking even, and killing 2 would be considered a profit. However, Zhou Junchen secretly believes that just having the monks to give us something to think about isn't very useful. We need something more practical, especially something that can fill our stomachs. In the past, even the residents of the Dragon King in Qingcong City was struggling to make ends meet. We really don't have the capital to attract people's hearts. However, with His Highness's Beiliang backing us, we don't need a lot. As long as we can place 10 or so large pots at each of the 3 city gates every day, I don't believe that no one will take the bait. If no one comes for a day, then there should be at least one in 10 days or half a month, right? As long as someone takes the lead, then we won't be able to stop the refugees from flocking to us. Perhaps everyone has a little bit of backbone, but there's also a distinction between what's important and what's important. Some people are more important, and there's no lack of people who are more important than their lives. However, there are still more people who are less important. Yu Ruru timidly lowered her eyes and softly interrupted Zhou Junchen. If no one dares to come, we can let the weak Qingcong soldiers pretend to be refugees. Zhou Junchen glared at her and said, "Woman, shut up." Chapter 1004. Su Fengnian waved his hand. He did not comment on Yu Ruru's strategy and signaled Zhou Junchen to continue. The latter, who was full of evil tricks, drank wine to moisten his throat. His face was flushed red. It was obvious that he was in a good mood. If we only use the Beiliang cavalry to crush the 3 towns, the refugees will definitely not be able to defeat them. They can hide in the western regions or even Beimang. If they scatter like birds and beasts, then they will ruin His Highness's grand plan. If they were forced into a corner by the Northern Liang Iron Cavalry, there would definitely be people who would defect to the Northern Mang Southern Dynasty in a fit of anger. I heard that in the western capital of the Southern Dynasty, there were indeed some important people who wanted to recruit the refugees for their own use. However, many of the policies to pacify the people were all bark and no bite. Presumably, they were obstructed by the western capital. Moreover, even though the refugees were poor, they were not stupid. They were afraid that the Northern Mang had ill intentions. Once they boarded the Southern Dynasty's pirate ship, they would be ordered to fight to the death with the Northern Liang Iron Cavalry. Compared to Zhou Junchen, the refugees in the Southern Dynasty had a bellyful of evil tricks. Internal strife, the ability to harm one's own people. These people who joined the Northern Mang slaves of two surnames are all carrying the experience slowly accumulated by generations of old ancestors for hundreds and thousands of years. Aren't the history books tirelessly teaching the scholars of the younger generation how to kill without shedding blood? Su Fengnian had a new level of respect for him. He smiled pleasantly and said, "Don't be sentimental. Let's talk about serious matters." Zhou Junchen quickly nodded like a chicken pecking rice. He said, "Zhou Junchen has a plan. There are 4 words: divide and conquer. There are 2 types of division. The first type is territorial. Excluding this dog fart Qing Tsong King, then your highness can promise that the other 3 armies will continue to be local emperors. However, they will have to submit to the Bailiang nominally. Your highness can add a new province to the refugees' land. This will give you the titles of provincial governor and general." Kai Anshan will definitely scoff at this, but it doesn't matter. Mal Yoka, who only cares about his own happiness and doesn't care about the lives of others, may be tempted. Moreover, Kai Anshan is not tactful and doesn't appreciate the kindness. It is possible that his subordinates will be tempted. In this way, the 2 towns' refugees will more or less have their own ulterior motives. In any case, if they defected to the Bailiang, when the time comes and they really have to fight to the death on the battlefield, it will be the soldiers under their command, not the officials. However, this matter still needs to be told by your highness personally. The second type of division and conquer is targeted at the refugees themselves. Some of them are abandoned soldiers who committed serious crimes in the Bailiang army. These people will be pardoned. There are also some people who are from the tyrannical families in Bailiang in the recent 10 years who were driven here. Your highness can restore their family property in Bailiang. If they have official titles, you can just return them. If you think too highly of them, you can reduce their family property by half and reduce their official titles. As for the earliest batch of refugees and locals, the people who surrounded them did not change their nature and were the largest in number. However, it was not necessarily true that they were impenetrable. Their ancestral businesses and ancestral graves were all within the borders of Northern Liang, so they were allowed to return to their hometowns to worship their ancestors. After witnessing the prosperity of their hometowns in Northern Liang, some of them would eventually be willing to return to their hometowns and return to their hometowns. There were also some desperados who had nowhere to escape and could only seek refuge in the land of refugees. Some of them were Jianghu people of the Central Plains, and some were descendants of officials who hated the Liang imperial court to the core. These people were even easier to deal with. As long as the prince issued an order to open the gates of Northern Liang for them, they would be the most willing to leave the land of refugees. There is one more thing that I have to be bold to say. Your highness has great ambitions and no one can match you. Therefore, Bailiang will definitely be able to take in the hundreds of thousands of refugees. However, your table manners will have to be better. How can you do that? Once the sinners from the 3 towns are recruited, for example, they will not be in a rush to join the border army and instead be sent to the relatively stable Lingzhou. However, their salary can be very low, much lower than the border army and even the Lingzhou army. Once they have integrated into Bailiang, they are originally people who can't stand loneliness and most of them don't have anything to worry about. At that time, they will probably start thinking about going to the border to obtain military merits. I've gone too far. Prince, please don't blame me. This lowly one will speak a bit more closely. If you want to succeed by dividing and ruling, it is nothing more than the method of combining kindness and might that all those in power since the ancient times are fond of using. This lowly one has already said that giving an official's hat, giving a starving person a mouthful of food, and removing a criminal's name is all Prince's great kindness and benevolence. In order to establish prestige, the prince doesn't necessarily need to personally take action like today. The young prince only needs to bring several thousand dragon elephant cavalry with him. The young prince has already made an illustrious name for himself, an unrivaled general who can kill Northern Mang's elite soldiers like cutting rice. With the prince's grace at the front and the young prince's cavalry trailing behind. Even if their bones are tough, they aren't as tough as the refugees, so they can only go with the flow and surrender. In any case, losing to this kind of hero isn't shameful at all, right? As for the remaining stubborn people, if they want to die, then they can go and die. From the 300,000 Beimang cavalry that the old prince handed over to you, who would be so careless to kill? Yu Ruru quietly curved her eyebrows. She was carefully observing the young vassal king's expression at all times. It seemed that her husband's nonsense was not able to keep his position as the ruler of Qingcang, but at the very least, he didn't fall into a worse situation. Su Fengnian smiled. You and a certain person's strategy of governing the refugees coincides a bit. You have about 50 to 60% of his skill. However, I have never been to the land of the refugees. I am different from you. Zhou Junchen subconsciously bent his waist even though he was sitting. He said with a flattering expression, "This little one is just making things up. I don't dare to compare myself to the expert beside your highness. If there is a 10 to 20% similarity, then it is like stepping on dog shit." Su Fengnian stood up. Zhou Junchen quickly followed. Su Fengnian said, "Zhou Junchen, I will give you two choices. Either you stay in Qingcang City and assist that person, or you go to Lingzhou and become the governor of Feek County. However, I feel that it is safer for you to choose the latter. With your backbone, when you encounter a life-and-death situation in the future, you will definitely become a Bailiang traitor. At that time, I will definitely want you to die. A person like you can barely be considered a capable official if you become a peace official. Bailiang lacks officials, but we don't need honest and upright officials who do nothing. When the time comes, you can be greedy. I don't mind, but you must remember not to delay your work for the people of Bailiang. Greedy officials, greedy for more and greedy for less. They only have one mouth and two hands. How much can they eat and take? Moreover, the truly valuable things can't be brought to the coffin. The rich family property is there for display. If you really want to use this as an example, the military power of Bailiang's border can be raised to another level. However, the Su family is not at the end of the line yet. Zhou Junchen and Yu Ruru, who had knelt down to express their gratitude, looked at each other. They could see the fear in each other's eyes. Su Fengnian said indifferently, "Both of you get up. You can probably stay in Qingcang for another month or so." Zhou Junchen and Yu Ruru got up and stood side by side. Su Fengnian suddenly smiled at Yu Ruru and said, "I have given Zhou Junchen the position of governor. I don't have anything to give you. Your situation has been written in Bailiang's spy reports. At the very least, as long as you are unwilling, no one will be able to make you take off your clothes in the future. If there is, and Zhou Junchen shamelessly agrees, come to Mount Qingliang. I will help you stop them." After Su Fengnian left, a loud slap sounded from behind him. Then, there was a burst of crying. Some were from Yu Ruru, and some were from Zhou Junchen. Su Fengnian walked out of the north gate of the residence of Dragon King, which was equivalent to leaving the city. In the north of the city, there was a small lake whose water reached his knees. He squatted by the lake, grabbed a handful of sand, and gently threw it into the lake. He was lost in thought. Actually, according to Chen Shiliang's original plan, the first thing he wanted to do was to use 20,000 cavalrymen to bathe Qingcang City in blood. He wanted to kill everyone around Qingcang City. Only then would he talk about the favor. Mal Yoka's soldier monks were actually a deal between Su Fengnian and the 6-pearl bodhisattva of Mount Lantua. Of course, Mal Yoka did not know the inside story. If the female Dharmaraja of the esoteric sect wanted to be the master of Mount Lantua, she would have to join forces with the Su family of Bailiang. Su Fengnian would then use this opportunity to control the vast area of the western region. Of course, there was also an urgent need, which was to form a military situation that would suppress hundreds of thousands of refugees from east to west. Then, he would send tens of thousands of light cavalrymen to the north and south borders to prevent the refugees from escaping. In fact, the refugees in this huge pocket would either surrender or die. Beimang's southern dynasty deliberately spread rumors that Su Zhao's last words were to bury the refugees with him before his death. Before Li Yishan died, he left behind a simple and comprehensive brocade pouch. Chen Shiliang's vicious strategy happened to coincide with it. However, in Su Fengnian, he knew that his master felt guilty towards these refugees who lost their homes because of him. It was just that he never said it out loud. Instead, he wrote it down on the tip of his pen. His master died without a grave and his ashes were scattered at the border. When one was born, one had someone to rely on when one was old, and one had someone to bury when one died. These were the 3 blessings of life that the withered man mentioned. The hundreds of thousands of refugees on this piece of land did not seem to be able to enjoy any of them. Li Yishan, who wrote the 20-year history of the refugees, Records of Knowing Autumn, called himself Water Margin Mountain Ghost in his old age. Water margin. In the wilderness. Wild ghosts by the water. Maybe it was because in his master's view, he was not the same as Zhao Chongling who brought thousands of servants to join the Su family. He was not the same as Chun Qiuyang who wanted to conquer the world. He, Li Yishan, had never walked into a temple, had never knelt before anyone. In the end, he was just like these homeless refugees, a wandering soul by tide-listening lake, a wild ghost on clear cold mountain. Su Fengnian leaned back and closed his eyes. He lay on the yellow sand, his hands behind his head. After eating Master Lu Hao's purple lightning, he ate Qilin's spiritual master Yuan Qingshan's steamed bun. He was a bit full. Chapter 1005. The residence of the Dragon King had been turned upside down, but Qingcong City did not have much of a fuss. To the refugees in the city, there were only a few hundred shiny bald heads. Those who were more informed knew that a cavalry of 800 people had entered the city at night to guard the residence of the Dragon King. This elite cavalry was all mounted on white horses and white armor. They were also armed with swords and crossbows, looking very imposing. It was an established fact that Bailiang controlled Qingcong City. Since they did not massacre the city, instead, resources were constantly flowing into the city. Many rare items that were usually priceless sprouted up overnight in Qingcong City. Most of the refugees just went with the flow and muddled through. It was not that there were no refugees who left the city, but the restrictions were relaxed and there were no obstructions. After a few days, these Qingcong nobles who had some family background quietly looked on coldly. When they saw the peaceful scene in the city, they resentfully returned to the city. Other than setting up pots and delivering porridge at the city gates, the Dragon King's residence had also become the new governor's official residence. Bailiang no longer banned the transportation of salt and iron to Qingcong. Moreover, the governor had begun to set up a household register. It was said that as long as the people of Qingcong passed the inspection, they would be allowed to enter Ling Province, the richest of the 3 provinces in Bailiang, to do business. Zhou Junchen, who had no chance to wear a dragon robe in his entire life, was very happy. The king of Bailiang was very efficient in doing things. The official documents signed by the governor of Bailiang, Chu Lushan and Ligongda, had already been sent to the entire Ling province. If he didn't have to help Governor Chen clean up the mess in Qingcong City, he could have dragged his family and rushed to Huangnam County, which was the granary of Ling province. This governor was a very lucrative position. The previous governor, Song Yan, was now the king of Ling province. It was clearly a good place to get promoted and get rich. Zhou Junchen, who was a fence-sitter, was a very good person. As long as he didn't have to work hard and was given a lot of benefits, he would do his best. He didn't hesitate at all. In the past half a year in the city, he had been serving Governor Chen, who was unfamiliar with this place. It was called working hard without complaint. Originally, he was a local emperor who didn't go to court every day. But these days, he didn't have much sleep. In the blink of an eye, he had become a personal soldier of Qingcong. He was resentful and frightened. Zhou Junchen, who was sandwiched between the new lord and his old subordinates, was really a matchmaker and a bride. He was so angry that his mouth was full of bubbles. However, Zhou Junchen, who considered himself a governor, was in good spirits. Most people who had something to look forward to were like this. No matter how short-sighted he was, as long as he could see the future, he wouldn't be afraid of being tired. Before the curtain of night fell, a young man who looked like a scholar, escorted by a group of white horse light cavalry, walked alone up the dilapidated northern wall of the city. He saw a guy with his hair tied into a Wudong Huangting Taoist crown squatting on top of the city wall, with a pair of sabers hanging from his waist, looking far to the north. The scholar followed the saberman's line of sight and looked to the north. In Beimang's Gusai province, last year's one-sided battle seemed to be an unexpected and complete victory for the Bailiang cavalry. But the scholar knew very well that it only hurt Bei Meng, and it was far from hurting their tendons and bones. Generally speaking, the pros and cons were half. The pros were that Gusai province was crushed until it was riddled with holes, and most of the beacons and relay routes were gone. For the time being, it would be difficult for a large number of cavalry troops to move south. The cons were that Bei Meng had been awakened, and the generals of the southern court who had distinguished military achievements would begin to re-evaluate the military strength of both sides of Liangmang. When the curtains of the next full-scale battle began, it would be difficult for Beiliang to move north so easily like a hot knife through butter. The young man, the new governor of Qingcang City, stepped forward and said softly, "Greetings, King of Beiliang." Su Fengnian turned his head and smiled. "Shiliang, you've come. You've been so busy these past few months that I didn't even have the nerve to ask you out for a drink." Chen Shiliang smiled and didn't respond. This was probably the difference between him and Su Beiji. Whether it was getting along with His Royal Highness or the new King of Liang, Su Beiji had always ridiculed and rolled his eyes when he should. He had never had the understanding of living under someone else's roof. However, Chen Shiliang was different. He had always kept his place. At that time, His Royal Highness's trusted aides parted ways. Su Beiji was sent to Longqing County, while Chen Shiliang lived in seclusion in the king's mansion on Mount Qingliang. He lived in a side room on the top floor of Tide Listening Pavilion and read all kinds of books. The books he read were all the books and manuscripts left behind by Li Yishan. Today, Beiliang's military strategy, especially the redivision of military officials and the geographical arrangement of 14 future Beiliang's most powerful military officers, came from Chen Shiliang. However, after Chen Shiliang got married, he was given full authority to deal with both the grain supply and the salt and iron official camp. Both were not satisfactory. The former was the provincial governor of Liang Imperial Court, Tantanon. Huan Wen personally stepped forward to make things difficult for Beiliang. Chen Shiliang did not lose unjustly. However, later in Yuzhou, even though he could order Huang Fucheng, who held the military power in Yuzhou, he was still pushed aside by the salt-eating tyrannical forces. Until now, the ownership of several major salt ponds was still undecided. This made many high-ranking officials of Beiliang scoff. In private, they laughed at this scholar who was about the same age as Su Beiji of the Beimeng aristocratic family and left the mountain at the same time. They said, "Sure enough, a poor family does not have a noble son." Then, Chen Shiliang, who had yet to achieve victory, was urgently summoned back by the new prince of Liang and thrown into a refugee land in the middle of nowhere to fend for himself. The governor of Qingcang City? Compared to any governor of Lingzhou? If this was not clearly demotion, then what was? Looking back at Su Beiji, he was already a provincial governor of Beiliang, second only to the administrator. Comparisons were odious. Chapter 1006. It was said that wutong trees could attract phoenixes to rest, but in reality, they liked sunlight and could not tolerate cold. Their sprouts were especially weak. It was hard to imagine that a wutong tree could survive in a place like Beiliang. However, since it was born in His Royal Highness's private residence on Mount Qingliang, it was equivalent to being born into a good family. Not only did it survive, but it was also abnormally luxuriant. It was just that the wutong trees in the Wutong'an were growing pleasantly, but the courtyard was somewhat gloomy and miserable. Probably because the Qingming festival was approaching, the people underground missed the people above too much. Therefore, there was a silent death in the Wutong'an. It was Cucumber from the Vermilion Bamboo Forest. This second-class servant girl's name had long been forgotten. When His Royal Highness returned from his first trip to Jianghu, the eldest son of the old Prince Liang, who loved eating cucumbers, gave her the vulgar nickname of Cucumber. At that time, she had protested, but later she got used to it and accepted it with hidden bitterness. Cucumber's death was sudden and inexplicable. She died when the new Prince Liang was coincidentally not on Mount Qingliang. Many people were caught off guard. The servants of the prince's residence outside of Wutong'an did not dare to say anything. Even the people in the courtyard kept quiet out of fear. Su Weisheng, who was in charge of all military affairs in the Wutong'an, did not say anything. The funeral was simple and rushed. Su Fengnian returned to the prince's residence from the refugee area with a light carriage. He still did not go to the Wutong'an that he rarely visited. Su Weisheng, who was sitting in a wheelchair, found him at the pavilion on Tide Hark Lake and handed him a suicide note written by Cucumber before she killed herself. Su Fengnian took it and threw it into the lake without even looking at it. A thin piece of sandalwood flowery paper landed lightly on the surface of the lake. After soaking wet, it slowly sank into the lake. It did not even cause the slightest ripple. The suicide note and the woman were the same. They floated lightly, as if they were insignificant. Su Weisheng calmly told Su Fengnian that after Cucumber finished writing the letter, she used a pair of chopsticks to stab through her neck in her room. She fell over the table and died in a very strange manner. It was only at dawn the next day that she was discovered by Baijiu, who was also a second-rank maidservant and had called her to the main room. Su Weisheng also said that in the letter, Cucumber admitted that she had been a spy planted by the imperial court in Bailiang since she was a child. She had betrayed the imperial court twice in her life. The first time was when she ventured into the refugee area on her own after returning to His Highness. The second time was when she revealed Bei Meng's whereabouts. At the end of the letter, she said that she hoped that His Highness would come back alive to see her will. She also said that she still wanted to serve His Highness in her next life and that she would never be like a ghost again. Su Fengnian's expression was calm. It was hard to tell whether he was happy or sad. Su Weisheng also said calmly, when the Eagle and Falcon family in Bailiang split up, the spies in Wutong'an and Chu Lushan were separated into internal and external spies. At that time, I knew that you had already discovered that there was a spy in Wutong'an. I hoped that they would restrain themselves a little and stop while they were ahead. Take it as giving them a chance to live. However, you should know that since you have embarked on this path, there is no way to turn back. There is no need to talk about cherishing one's life. A woman's life is short. Moreover, she is a female spy. After all, she can still decide when and how she will die. She didn't suffer before she died. None of the female spies who were dug out from behind the flames of war in the Spring and Autumn War were as fortunate as her. Su Fengnian sighed and fiercely rubbed his cheeks. His words seeped through the gaps between his fingers. They were slightly unclear. There is another spy who is involved with Bei Meng. She is hidden even deeper. Who is she? Without her leak, not to mention alerting the Orange Province's disciplinary magistrate, Murong Bao Ding, even Hong Jingyan wouldn't have rushed to Qingcang City to kill me. These two people have chosen the right time. It is obvious that they have been carefully deduced by Bei Meng's think tank. It seems that she is much more thick-skinned than that girl, Cucumber. Su Weisheng asked in return, do you really not know? Or are you pretending to be stupid? How many people in Wutong'an can be so patient and scheming? Su Fengnian put down his hands and folded them in his sleeves. He turned his head to look at the surface of the lake and said softly, I will go see her right now. Sister, help me prepare 2 cups of wine. Su Weisheng hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he didn't say anything. The second-rate maids in Wutong'an all had their own private rooms, each with their own charm. Green Ant's room was the most miscellaneous. There were many strange objects in the room, but there weren't many books. She was good at playing chess, but she didn't have a chessboard or a chess piece. When she played chess, she would play chess directly with His Royal Highness in the main courtyard. She was always able to beat Su Fengnian to the point of throwing away his helmet and armor. She never showed mercy. Even when she faced the miraculous second princess who created the 19 paths, when their minds were connected, they could occasionally match evenly. This was enough to show that Green Ant was extremely intelligent. Perhaps it was because extreme intelligence led to injury. But Green Ant was also the weakest of the maids in Wutong'an. Fortunately, Su Fengnian was a prodigal son who spent lavishly on the people around him. Even when the old Zhenren of Wudong Mountain, Song Jiming, sent precious medicinal pills to the prince's mansion, he would regularly give them to Green Ant to nourish her body. Today, Green Ant wasn't the only one on duty in Wutong'an. The door to the room wasn't closed. She sat alone by the window, looking at the green Wutong'an trees outside with a smile on her face. When she heard a knock on the door, she turned around and saw His Royal Highness holding a cup of wine in each hand. She stood up with a smile. Most of the women in Wutong'an still liked to see this gentle and handsome young man as His Royal Highness. Su Fengnian walked to the window, put down 2 cups of wine, and followed her line of sight to look outside the green screen window. Green Ant didn't care about seniority. In any case, Wutong'an didn't pay much attention to these rules. She gently sat back in her chair, put her elbow on the armrest, leaned her body, and raised her head to look at him. It had been like this for so many years. This man had always been staring at Bailiang, the Jianghu, and the country. She could only look at his side or back. At most, She could only see his front when they were playing chess and drinking. Green Ant smiled gently and asked, "Cucumber is a fool. Your Highness, don't you think so?" Chapter 1007. Su Fengnian didn't shift his gaze. He nodded and said, "In this courtyard, she's always been the stupidest. Her handwriting is the ugliest, her chess playing is the worst, and her zither playing is also lacking in spirit. Every time you guys instigated her to go and provoke bad luck, to assassinate Yu Wei, to assassinate Pei Nan Wei, to assassinate Lu Chengyan. She attacked from all sides and made enemies on all sides. Even after taking the blame, she still thinks that she's a righteous and indomitable heroine. Every time I wanted to scold her, I didn't know how to open my mouth. If I scolded her in a roundabout way, she would definitely take it as a compliment. If I scolded her directly, she would cry to death. The stupidest one of us became a spy. In the end, she was really stupid to death. So I don't blame her, because she's just a silly girl. Besides, she still has her parents in Lianjiang Prefecture, so she had no choice. But what about you? You've always been the smartest one in this courtyard. My sister said that you have no relatives or friends in Beimang, so why were you willing to risk your life for the barbarians? For fun? If you had switched sides earlier and been content to be a Bailiang woman, Green Ant, who would have been able to come to Wutongan to kill you? Zhong Liang? Murong Baoding? Or Hong Jingyan? The latter two, the top 10 martial art masters in the world, were both called to Qingcong City by you. Didn't they still fail to kill me? I really don't understand. Green Ant said calmly, "Your Highness, why don't we drink wine and chat? Which cup is your Highness, and which cup is mine? Just take it as a farewell for me. I'm braver than Cucumber, and I'm more shrewd. I also hope that your Highness will be able to return home alive, but I want to be able to talk to your Highness again. Cucumber doesn't dare. Not only is he stupid, he's also a coward." Su Fengnian laughed coldly and said softly, "He's already a ghost. It's good that we're here before Qingming Festival." Green Ant shook Su Fengnian's sleeve, her eyes blurred as she looked into his eyes. This beautiful and intelligent woman muttered to herself, "We are both women, why should I be a maid? Why should I call myself a servant when I see your Highness? Why should I only be able to look at you from afar for the rest of my life? I'm not stupid, I dare to kill people, I can even kill people on paper. I also have a name, I also want to get married, I want to be a good wife and teach my children. I have too many ideas, but your Highness, do you know what my biggest idea is? I remember when His Highness came back from the capital, he drank with me and talked a lot about dreams. He said that the dream of a homeless dog was to have a home. It was said that the dream of a soldier crossing the river was to be able to turn back after crossing the river. It was said that the dream of a swordsman was to enter the Jianghu with a sword and leave the Jianghu with a sword. It was also said that you don't want anyone to die because of you. You don't want to see the people around you die one after another. So my dream is to make you look at me one more time, really look at me, just like now. You can only remember me when I'm dead. You can hate me for as long as you live." Su Fengnian shook back his sleeve, not letting her grab it. Green Ant exhaled and smiled sweetly. "I'm done talking. I can die now. Your Highness, you can leave now. Don't dirty your eyes. I don't want to make your Highness feel guilty before I die." Su Fengnian turned and left. Not long after Su Fengnian left the room, there was a slight squeaking sound of a wheelchair outside the room. Green Ant didn't turn to look at the woman who was colder and smarter than herself. She bent down and reached for a cup of wine. "Is this the Green Ant wine prepared by the second commandery princess?" Green Ant didn't look at the woman in the wheelchair, and the latter didn't look at Green Ant either. Her expression was indifferent. Green Ant snorted softly. "Then it's the same." The Green Ants were really smart. If His Highness personally prepared 2 cups of Green Ant wine, 1 cup would be Dove wine, while the other cup would naturally be ordinary Green Ant wine. Whether the Green Ants lived or died would depend on fate. However, if it was the second commandery princess Su Weisheng who gave her 2 cups of wine, she was destined to be poisoned behind His Royal Highness' back. Therefore, it didn't matter which cup she drank. Green Ant picked up a cup of Green Ant wine and drank it in 1 gulp. It was so fast that she didn't even taste the wine before she picked up the second cup and drank it in 1 gulp. Since she was going to die, it was better to drink an extra cup of wine. She had played chess with the second commandery princess many times and won only a few times because she had accumulated advantages bit by bit. Green Ant sat back in her chair and waited for her death. After a long time, Green Ant frowned. She heard Su Weisheng say coldly, "I did prepare 2 cups of poison wine for you, and I also guessed that he would change the 2 cups for you. He wants you to drink 1 cup of wine and feel lucky that you're still alive. Then, you'll leave Bailiang and find a beautiful place to hide. You'll be able to live with a clear conscience. However, I won't let you leave this courtyard so comfortably. I'm here to force you to drink 2 cups of wine. I'll let you, an ungrateful wretch, know who's the one who owes whom. He doesn't want you to die, but at the same time, he wants you to live comfortably. I'm not that kind. You can only die of old age. I'll let a few elite falcons follow you for the rest of your life." A voice interrupted the quarrel between the 2 women. "That's enough, sister." Su Fengnian came back and pushed the wheelchair away. Su Fengnian pushed her to the top of Mount Qingliang. They looked down at Liang Zhou together. He said softly, "My last bit of patience has been worn out. So, sister, don't worry. I won't be so kind in the future. Mother said before that no one is born to suffer. Even if a man can't treat a woman well, he can't hurt her as he wishes. He has to treat her as a real human being. Now that Wutong'an is peaceful, I don't have anything to worry about. This time, you can take it as I've made a clean break. I'll be willful with you for the last time. Sister, what do you think?" Su Weisheng grunted in agreement. Su Fengnian smiled in surprise. "Sister, when did you become so reasonable? I'm not used to it." Su Weisheng knocked her head hard against him. She said calmly, "I saw that after you became king of Bailiang, you went to the Bureau of Machine Building in the back of the mountain more often than I expected. That's why I made an exception and allowed you to be willful for once." Bailiang's Bureau of Machine Building was built at the base of Mount Qingliang. It was this inconspicuous organization that produced the best sabers, the best spears, the best crossbows, and the best armor for the Northern Liang cavalry. Every saber, every spear, every crossbow, and every set of armor were only slightly better than the others. But with the addition of the 300,000 cavalrymen, how enormous and shocking was the accumulated hidden advantage. Bailiang was most dependent on gold and silver. Other than the military expenses, it was the large-scale military equipment produced by the Bureau of Machine Building. The second king of Bailiang, who guarded the northwest gate of the empire, attached even more importance to this than the old king. It was almost to the point of morbidity. Su Fengnian's eyes were resolute. He made a shooting gesture with his hand and said in a deep voice, "I want to talk to Bei Mang Liang about an old principle set by Su Shao. The greatest principle in the world is within the range of Bailiang's crossbows." Chapter 1008. The common people of Bailiang only knew that there was a group of people behind the mountain, living to the north of Mount Qingliang. But they had no way of knowing what they did or what their identities were. The mountain behind Mount Qingliang was also known as Bakin Mountain, and it had always been a forbidden area. A wheelchair slowly descended the mountain. Su Weisheng was wrapped in a thick black fur coat, her 2 fingers gently wrapped around her collar. At the foot of the mountain, there was a small navy blue building, unremarkable. She naturally knew that the Real Bailiang Bureau of Machine Engineering was built underground, and it was brightly lit all year round. When Liang swallowed spring and autumn, the craftsmen of the Mahis clan had given their all for the Zhao clan. After greatly benefiting the common people, they originally thought that they could retire and live alone in the mountains and forests to do some research. However, with the nature of the Zhao clan and the old Grand Secretary Liang always belittled the Mahis clan as the 10th nation of spring and autumn, the thousands of Mahis disciples scattered throughout the imperial court were all slaughtered. Especially Gu Jiantang and the other Mahis disciples of the great generals, almost all of them vanished from the face of the earth in a single night. Not even their corpses could be found. Only less than 100 people were left, living an ignoble existence under the protection of the Su clan. Among them, the 2 elders, Master Craftsman Song Zhongsui and Yang Guangdou, were the 2 elders. Song Zhongsui was skilled in weapon forging, while Yang Guangdou was skilled in offense and defense. During the mourning period, Su Fengnian, who was pushing the cart behind him, went to the machine-making bureau. Other than chasing souls and demanding lives, he shamelessly urged Song Zhongsui and his disciple to speed up the crafting of the talisman armor. He also asked Yang Guang for advice on the Western Front. Su Fengnian was no stranger to the machine-making bureau, so he didn't need to rush at the last minute. His Royal Highness, who was still a teenager, would often sneak into the machine-making bureau's underground lair to admire the unique scene there. The misleading geographical map of Qingliang Mountain that was purposely leaked out from the prince's mansion when he was playing fishing tricks with his enemies in Jianghu was created by Su Fengnian and Song Zhongsui's disciple, Chao Wei. Relying on this map, it wasn't difficult to enter Qingliang Mountain and get close to Wutong'an, but it was impossible to find the exact location. It could be said that His Royal Highness and Chao Wei were both scourges. When they were young, Su Fengnian was beaten black and blue by Chao Wei relying on his skills. If Su Xiao wanted to go to the machine-making bureau to help his son get back, Song Zhongsui and Yang Guang would raise their heads and pick their noses and ears, pretending that they didn't know anything. In any case, if they wanted to find that child Chao Wei in that maze, unless Su Xiao was determined to use 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers to dig 3 feet into the ground, it would be impossible. But later on, Su Fengnian learned his lesson and bribed many of his peers in the machine-making bureau to suppress Chao Wei, blocking the way and trapping him. In short, Su Fengnian and Chao Wei, who was a few years older than him, didn't have a good relationship. In fact, they were born to be incompatible with each other. However, each of them had their own weaknesses. For example, when Su Fengnian said that he wanted to frame someone, or when he wanted to fiddle with some fantastical objects, no matter how unwilling Chao Wei's mouth was, he would do it more efficiently than anyone else. Su Weisheng arrived at the entrance of the bureau, but she didn't enter. She let Su Fengnian enter alone while she took a detour. The wheels followed the quiet limestone path back to the sunny side of Qingliang Mountain. Su Fengnian walked into the machine forging bureau without any obstructions. The tunnels with lights on the walls extended downwards as if there was no end to them. The machine forging bureau was said to be large enough to fit an inverted Qingliang Mountain. Su Fengnian walked for about an hour, passing through 7 secret rooms and 12 secret tunnels before he finally reached a certain place at the bottom. He saw a 2-story tall refining furnace with more than 10 ladders around it. About 100 feet away from the furnace, there was a desk filled with scribbled blueprints. There was a mess under the desk, and there were a few red-faced old men arguing endlessly, occasionally pointing at the furnace. Su Fengnian didn't disturb these old men's argument. He walked in front of the furnace, his face red from the light of the flames. This furnace was called Cauldron Tool, and it had an extraordinary origin. The Tongxi sword furnace, which had already passed away, and the Dongyue sword lake furnace, which was still being forged, paled in comparison to this furnace. It was said that when Great Qin had conquered the world, it had collected all of the ironware in the world to forge the 9 cauldrons, which were used to suppress the 2 cities, 3 rivers, and 4 mountains. Su Fengnian smiled, and just as he was daydreaming, someone jumped up and slapped him on the head. Su Fengnian couldn't be bothered to turn around, so he sent that rude fellow flying with a single slap. Curses immediately sounded out from behind him. Ever since Su Fengnian had started practicing the saber, the fellow behind him had become much more obedient. However, a leopard couldn't change its spots. That Chao fellow couldn't help but provoke Su Fengnian a few times, and this was the result. Chao Wei rubbed his cheeks and stood side by side with Su Fengnian. This young man was short, but he didn't lose to others. When interacting with Su Fengnian, he liked to stand on his tiptoes. Even so, he was still half a head shorter than Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I heard that the great-grandson was created by you?" Chao Wei proudly said, "Compared to the sharpest ancestor, the sharpness is a bit worse. Compared to the sturdiest grandson, the firmness is a bit worse. Compared to the lightest father, it's only a bit heavier. Now you know how powerful it is, right?" Su Fengnian poured cold water on Chao Wei's sarcastic face. "They're all just a little bit worse. Which one of them is the best among all the Bailiang sabers?" Su Fengnian and Chao Wei gave the Bailiang saber nicknames. The old ancestor was the first real Su family saber. In the early spring and autumn period, the Su family's troops relied on this first-generation cold saber to conquer the world. It could be said that they were invincible. In the middle and late spring and autumn period, such as the end of the war in Western Shu and Xiangfan, they switched to the second-generation saber. It was not as sharp as the first-generation old ancestor, but it was relatively lighter and sturdier. When they took over Bailiang, the third generation of the Bailiang saber, Old Father, made a new choice. Nowadays, the Bailiang saber, Old Father, had been hung by many rich young men in neighboring prefectures of Bailiang. Most of the Bailiang sabers with the most beautiful curves were the son. By the time the grandson generation came, it was already 5 generations. Then in the hands of Chao Wei, it was the youngest great-grandson. These 6 Zhongliang sabers, unless one was a veteran soldier who was used to weapons, otherwise, it would be difficult to distinguish the differences between them. The 5th generation Su family saber, which was privately called Grandson by Su and Chao Wei, was already recognized by the military masters of Liang and Beimang as the best war saber in both offense and defense. Whether it was on foot, war or horse, it was the best in the world. It was not that the generals of the southern dynasty of Beimang, Prince of Yanqi, Prince of Liang and Prince of Guangling, Zhao Yi, these famous warriors, did not think of mass copying. It was just that the production of a seemingly simple saber involved the quality of the iron ore, the efficiency of the iron mining, the temperature of the furnace, the forging process, the design of the mold, and so on. It even had to take into account the size of the soldier using the saber. The knowledge required was complicated and difficult. In addition to the many advantages of the Beiliang's iron ore quality and superb craftsmanship, the most important thing was that the Beiliang cavalry had been guarding the frontier for 20 years. Although Su Fengyan's sarcastic remarks about Chao Wei's great-grandson did not sound like much, in fact, he did not need to see the knife with his own eyes and touch it to know that this generation's Su Dao was domineering. It was not the sharpest or the sturdiest, but it was definitely the killing weapon that could exert the most lasting lethality. As expected, Chao Wei, who felt insulted, jumped up and scolded, "You layman, if you have the ability, don't touch a great-grandson in your life." Su Fengyan was too lazy to bicker with him. He reached out his hand and very quickly, Chao Wei's apprentice brothers ran over and presented 3 new knives with both hands. This generation's Su Dao was also a great-grandson, but according to common practice, the cavalry, infantry, and Lingzhou soldiers guarding the rear all had their own subtle preferences. Generally speaking, the Beiliang cavalry, especially the elite heavy cavalry, would be equipped with the most new and outstanding cold knives. As long as a new knife appeared, they would be able to change it almost immediately. On the other hand, the normal guards in Lingzhou, such as those who were not guarding the dangerous Tong Pass, were much slower. Su Fengyan took one of the war cavalry knives. His left hand held the handle of the knife and held it horizontally across his chest. The finger of his right hand brushed across the blade, ignoring the blood that seeped out of his index finger. He narrowed his eyes and knocked on the body of the knife a dozen times. He pricked up his ears to listen to the slight echoes that ordinary people could not recognize. He nodded in satisfaction, and a warm smile slowly spread across his elegant face. The young Mahist disciples who were regarded as traitors by Chao Wei were relieved of a heavy burden. They looked at each other and smiled. Chapter 1009. Just as Su Fengyan was about to speak, he heard a loud roar. An old man called out, surnamed Su. Su Fengyan handed the saber back to Moz and walked towards the desk. The Mahist Grandmaster Song Chongsui had his hands behind his back, his body reeking of alcohol. He tilted his head and signaled for Su Fengyan to follow behind him. The old man with a face full of beard like overgrown weeds walked towards a newly opened secret room. Yang Guangdo was not as slovenly as Song Chongsui. He wore a green robe and looked clean and fresh. Walking beside Su Fengyan, he softly said, "Old Song followed Prince's instructions and used 20 days to finish it. He had to drink 6 or 7 jugs of wine every day to refresh himself. After I saw it, I felt that it was not bad." "Right, Prince. How is little Prince's talisman armor? How much of Murong Baoding's attack did it withstand? If we change it to weight, did it exceed our initial estimate of 16,000 jin? How much tenacity did the talisman armor grow on its own? Where does it need to be improved? If the heavenly tribulation purple lightning is measured by 8 or 9 or 9, as for how heavy it should be, Prince, you should give us an exact number. This way, the machine bureau can be targeted. We can't spend so much effort to build a mirage. This is against the rules of the Mahist family. Prince should also know Old Song's temper, with his nature of wanting to get to the bottom of things." At the front, Song Chongsui gave a cold snort. Su Fengyan took out a prepared letter from his bosom. He smiled and said, "I've written all of these things in the secret letter. Elder Yang, you just need to follow it step by step." Yang Guangdo put the letter in his sleeve and nodded with a smile. Song Chongsui pushed open the door to the secret room. His field of vision suddenly opened up. There were mountains and rivers under his feet. This was probably the largest and most detailed sand table in history. It included the 3 provinces of Beiliang, the land of refugees, the western regions, Western Shu, Nanzhao, and all 13 provinces of the Beimang dynasty. To be precise, This was the entire western line that ran through the world. Song Chong Sui did not have the slightest sense of accomplishment. He stared at the vast sand table and said in a serious tone, 20 main rivers, 67 mountains, and 140 cities and military towns are all in it. According to the intelligence report, the military allocation of each side's forces was also based on the number of chess pieces instead of 1,000 people. It was barely clear at a glance. The reason why I've been helping you day and night is because my Mahist sect is living under someone else's roof, and the Su family has helped us, the remnants of the bandits, survive for over 20 years. Therefore, it's reasonable for us to do our part. To tell. Tell. To me too. Tell him. To me, to me. To me. To me. To me. Su Fengnian grunted and said calmly, the Empress of Beimang said it herself. Now it depends on when and where the battle will begin. Our Beiliang no longer has the extravagant hope that Beimang will break into the quagmire east of Liang with both feet first. Elder Yang and Mr. Wang of the Yin Shuigong have predicted that 1 foot will step east and 1 foot will step west. You will have to start all over again. Yang Guangdou sighed and said guiltily, it's my fault for not being skillful enough. I made a mistake in my plan and misled the great general and the prince. That year, second princess did remind me to prepare for the worst. But I have made several deductions. I don't think that Beimang has any chance of winning if they go straight to the east under the order of Taiping. Su Fengnian waved his hand and interrupted Yang Guangdou's words. He said softly, it's okay. Elder Yang, you don't have to blame yourself. In the end, the gains and losses of the study table still have to give way to the outcome of a tough battle. Song Chong Sui sneered. Elder Yang listened to what he said. This guy looks down on you, the strategists who only know how to talk on paper. He is really of the same origin as Lame Su. He doesn't believe in anything. In the end, he only believes in the knife in his hand. Su Fengnian and Yang Guangdou both laughed it off. Chao Wei had sneaked into the sand table at some point. He walked in an arc and squatted in one place, muttering endlessly. Su Fengnian looked at the guy's back. The two of them were natural enemies. Su Fengnian was very familiar with Chao Wei. This shorty was very cheap. He was the kind of guy who would never stand if he could sit, and never sit if he could lie down. He was very shameless. Those who were not familiar with him would feel that he deserved a scolding after a few words. After getting familiar with him, they would feel that this guy really deserved a beating. Chao Wei was afraid of death and blood, but he wanted to lead troops to war one day. He dreamed of going to war himself. Other people hoped to be conferred the title of Marquis because they wanted a bright future and power. But Chao Wei just wanted to have fun. Before Su Fengnian became the king of Beiliang, Chao Wei was still quiet. They just quarreled when they met. But now that Su Fengnian had become the king of Beiliang, Chao Wei was like a cat who had been injected with chicken blood. He shouted that he wanted to ask Su Fengnian for a few thousand light cavalry, and then ran to the western region to hide. In his words, he wanted to directly stab Beimang. Su Fengnian did not pay attention to him at first, but this guy threatened to exchange the 6th generation Su Dao for the command of a few thousand cavalry. As a result, his great-grandson really came out. Chao Wei's art of war was unorthodox. Su Fengnian was not sure of his depth, but Chao Wei's style could be described as an example. Just like playing chess, Chao Wei was not willing to sit down and play. He would feel too tired, so there was no need to make the first move and think long and hard. Chao Wei would only look at the two people playing chess with cold eyes and would not say anything. But when the two sides were about to end the game, he would randomly take out a chess piece that should not be on the chessboard and knock it down. He would say that the game was settled, but he would say that it was a game where he could defeat 200 chess pieces with 1 or 2 chess pieces. Who would not want to beat this kind of rascal to death? However, the sloppy Chao Wei was only afraid of one person. Even if it was Su Weisheng, whether it was fighting, playing chess, the art of war, or quarreling, Chao Wei did not have a chance of winning. He really had to admit that. In the past, Chao Wei was short. His catchphrase was "Wait until I become the great general of the country. If you dare to look down on me, I'll chop off your head. Then we'll see who's taller." As a result, Su Weisheng coldly retorted, saying that with Chao Wei's height, it was useless to chop off other people's heads. Only by chopping at the waist could one be taller than others. Since then, Chao Wei was no longer willing to say this catchphrase. Before Su Fengnian left, He was scolded by Old Man Song. Song Zhongshui scolded this guy for being a prodigal who did not know how to manage the household. Song Zhongshui scolded this guy for accepting the second imperial edict of the imperial court, accepting the title of pillar of the state and the imperial court's decision not to revive him. He scolded him for having no backbone and also scolded Su Fengnian for neglecting the essentials and neglecting the generals. In any case, this old man scolded whatever he thought of. Song Zhongshui's attitude showed that he was not satisfied with anything. The young king of Bailiang was scolded with spittle in his face, but his smiling face did not change. He also did not talk back. He just stood there and wiped his face with his sleeve several times. If Yang Guangdou did not stop him, Song Zhongshui, who was full of energy, would have rolled up his sleeves and directly pointed at the new king's nose and scolded. Su Fengnian waited until the old man had no more energy to scold him. Then he turned and left with a helpless face. Yang Guangdou stood at the door with a helpless face and said, "Old Song, it's about time. Su Fengnian is the king of Bailiang after all." Song Zhongshui stared and said, "What? Can't I scold him after he became a king?" Yang Guangdou glanced at the young man's back and said softly, "You should at least leave him some face. You and I both know that it is not easy for this young man to become a king. If it was someone else who was scolded by you like this, he would have already thrown a tantrum." Song Zhongshui snorted coldly and said, "He dares." Yang Guangdou smiled and asked, "Do you really think he doesn't dare?" Song Zhongshui was stunned and smiled knowingly. "This kid won't." Yang Guangdou nodded slowly and said, "That's right." Song Zhongshui sighed softly and said, "I am too lazy to scold others, and I don't want to scold them. Nowadays in Bailiang, most of the old men who can scold him have left. If even I don't scold him, this kid will be really lonely." Chao Wei sneaked behind his two masters and said shamelessly, "The saber has been made. That guy can't not give me a soldier, right?" Song Zhongshui slapped Chao Wei's head and said, "Look at you, go play with your eggs." Chao Wei said angrily, "That guy is so stingy that he won't give me anything. He has no shame. No, give me back my saber." Yang Guangdou blinked and reached out his hand. He turned it over and said with a playful smile, "This number can't run away." Chao Wei was stunned on the spot. Su Fengnian walked back to the ground and carried a new saber from the Su family. He walked along the shady mountain road to the top of Mount Qingliang and sat on a stone bench at the bottom of the building. He pulled out the cold saber from its scabbard that might soon be stained with blood on the border and gently flicked it. Great rivers and mountains, great heads that can never be cut off.